Do you want me to get online and see if it's coming through?
No, no, we're good now. There it is. Hey everyone, I know there's no intro. Technical difficulties, I guess, on this side, or maybe not difficulties, more like just straight up missing it. But welcome to Talkin' Shop with Outlier Firefighters, episode number 37. I am Alex Tanner. This is Rob Fisher. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to chat with you tonight.
I'm excited to be here, brother. It's going to be fun. Hopefully, it's better than our debate that happened a couple days ago, which was just an absolute disaster.
Yeah, which debate was that?
I'm talking about the presidential debate.
Oh my God, yeah.
I don't even care
Oh,
who you were looking for. It was like, my God, this is please
oh.
end this because the world is laughing at us.
That is
So,
an
anyways,
endless rabbit hole. You're right. As always, if you guys are in the chat and you want to ask a question to Rob, please throw it out there, and we'll try to get through. I'll juggle all those different things. Just so you guys know, Rob's recently retired. He's from up in Washington, and my wife, who's not watching, no, I'm not going to ask him any questions about Twilight like you asked me to. Um, Young officers on
I
fire.
wouldn't have I wouldn't have the answers anyways.
That's
Sorry.
okay. That was the first thing she asked me. She
I'm
goes, "He's from Washington." Ask
I'm
him about
too old.
I'm too out of that. I want nothing to do with that. But uh, so young officers on fire, roof pervs, fools, lots of stuff. FDIC speaker. I mean, I could probably talk about everything that you've done in your career and now you're continuing to do. But again, it's really awesome to have you here, and we're gonna just talk some shop. I can't believe I just rolled right into that. But
Yeah.
so again, thank you so much for coming on. So we'll just kind of get right into it. So the first thing, your first exposure to the fire service, just in general.
It was 1973. Oh, my dog's in the background. Perfect. It
Nice.
was 1973. My mom took me down to the local firehouse, which was we were living in Seattle and Station 20 on in Greenwood. And we walked to the station, rang the doorbell. It was a small station with one single engine, and these four huge, monstrous men answered the door and brought me into the station, showed me around the station, and and basically they got a call, fire call about that time, and so I got to hear the bells going off. I got the bays coming up, everybody coming out, jumping on the truck. Of course, in those days they rode tailboard. They had a four man engine company, and they went blasting out of the station, left my mom and I there, and I was like, holy shit, if I could say that as a little 5-year old, but that's probably what I was thinking. I got to do this. And so that was kind of like the first touch. And then the neighbor to my grandparents, John Riss, he was a disabled Seattle fireman and got hurt back in the 50s. And so I got to talk with him a lot growing up. And then, of course, emergency and watched emergency as, through my childhood. So from a very young age, that's what I wanted to do. My dad was a truck driver, no uncles in the fire service, nothing. And so I'd kind of like bop into Seattle fire stations that were being built. This is in the 70s, so they were changing out of some old stations, and I was just hooked. And then as I got older, I got into a cadet program. We call it an explorer out here in the west side, but I was an explorer at 15, did that until I was 17, and then thought I would join the Marine Corps because I knew I wasn't, this is going to be in the 80s. I knew I wasn't going to be hired at 18 years old. So I figured, why not join the Marine Corps? It looked good on a resume. And I got hurt while at boot camp, so I'm not a Marine. And they sent me home, which wasn't too terribly bad because then I fell into what we called a resident program. So it was really cool. At 18 years old, I got to move into the fire station, live there in one of the rooms, and just go on calls and get paid a little bit. We worked a grueling 2 on, 2 off with no vacation days. So it was just like, and you had to work a normal job during the day, and then you were going on calls at night. So and then after that, that kind of led me into my career.
Ah, it's cool. I missed one of those. There was a place around us called Knollwood that was a lot like that, and a lot of firefighters in my area went through Knollwood, and they in that aged right that age group they would live there and they would do the same thing. They eventually got absorbed by another department, but opportunities like that aren't quite as much anymore. Where you can be that age. I mean, you could be a volunteer probably still, but
Yeah, we just don't have. We used to have resident programs in the state of Washington all over the place. The university, or I'm sorry, Washington State University, WSU had a firefighter program where they actually lived in the dorms and went to college and they were getting their degrees and they gave to the fire service. That program doesn't exist anymore. A lot of the resident programs don't exist because it just got harder to have the residents living there. And so now a majority of the programs, at least in my state, have gone part paid. So you don't have to live at the station. You just come in and pull shifts. And when I left the job, well, actually, a few years before I left the job, probably about 5 years ago, we just completely got rid of all of our part paid. So we became an all paid department with some like volunteer auxiliary stuff, auxiliary members. But generally speaking, there's just a program like the resident program just doesn't exist anymore around here.
yeah, it's very interesting how I think maybe population growth and all that has kind of just changed the dynamics, I guess. It's much like that here with the volunteer world. A lot of those volunteer departments either became paid on call or paid on premise, and now a lot of them are just straight up going all full time. But it's
Yeah,
crazy.
I don't know why the change occurred. I mean, we still have part paid departments around
Yeah.
us in the area, but they just got rid of the live-in portion of it and just put them on shift. Or maybe it's just easier just to rotate people around so that you don't have because when it would require multiple rooms to be able to have the resident program there, right? So
Yeah.
because that was your room,
Yeah.
that's where you stayed every night.
Yeah. It's not like you went home somewhere else, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been a fun life to live, to be honest. When I was that age, I would have eaten that up for sure.
Dude, it was a blast.
Yeah.
A lot of us got hired together, and we got hired, in the department that we were working in as well, and a lot of us got, a lot of them got hired in other departments too. But man, the 18 to 21, just going to fires and emergency calls, and I mean, they gave us a lot of responsibility. We were officers at times, we were drivers, we were all drivers, and if it wasn't your shift day, you were riding backwards. So if fire came in and it was a Friday night and I hadn't been out drinking or having a good time, I could jump on the engine. I would have to be riding backwards because the resident that was on duty was driving, and a lot of responsibility. You had to grow up really quick.
You know what? And maybe we'll add a little bit of conversation about that because I really do. I love talking about like responsibility in youth in the fire service, which is why I think like young officers on fire. I'm drawn to just that name alone, right? Like, I think we're at least in my area, like we're in a huge turnover where now the youth is kind of becoming involved in a lot of those positions of like lieutenancy like positions and training officer positions and things like that where like maybe 10 or 15 years ago that would not have been the case where people in their relatively young fire service career would be in those. Is it kind of when I know you're retired now, but like were you starting to see kind of that turnover in your area in your last couple of years of working?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of well, in our area there's a decent amount of younger members coming into the fire department, and um, it just doesn't seem as young as when we came in. And then to kind of parlay that with like the duties, the responsibilities. I won't say that I had more responsibilities than any other younger individual, but the responsibilities that I had driving and in times, and sometimes being an officer was the expectations were pretty damn low. And it was because the area that we were protecting, I mean, this is what you got. It'd be like living out in the rural area, and you're probably not going to have a engine company of a bunch of solid firefighters doing the V split on a bulk bed come into a house because it's just the expectations are a little bit lower. So today's expectations in our communities that we used to be, younger and residents is a much higher now. And so I mean I don't I enjoyed my time, but I think when I look back and making decisions as a 18 or a 19-year-old going to a fire and like that was not good.
Yeah.
That was not good. It probably wasn't good for the public either. I was doing the best that I can. I guarantee you it didn't sound very good on the radio, and I didn't have a tactical mindset. It was just I'm just regurgitating what I've heard before. And but as for the fire service and the young firefighters that come in, I'm digging them, and I know we don't have on our list, talking about like generational gaps, but I'm an X Gen and now Z Gen. Now they've got the well, they're calling them the Alpha Gen, I believe, and it's a generation of the early 20s right now that are coming in, the 18 to I think it's a yet defined generation, which
Yeah.
is why they call them the Alpha. But as these individuals like the Z Gen comes in, there's been a lot of complaints about, these firefighters don't know what they're doing and they don't have any lifetime experience. And I agree they don't have the lifetime experience that you do. And so that's kind of like one of the premises of Young Officers on Fire and being involved is like, it's our job to teach them. And you can make fun of them and say, well, I need a Phillips screwdriver and they don't know what it is. You're like, I need the one that looks like a plus. And like, oh, yeah, okay, I can do that. Well, we have to take the time and the effort to train them. And that's all it comes down to, because the world today versus what it was when, I came in 36 years ago is completely different. And it impacts our generations, which is the negative side of it that everybody complains about. But I think what you're looking for in those younger firefighters is just enthusiasm, a willingness to learn, um, strength, their ability I mean, I think today the expectations, physical expectations, are, I don't want to say they're greater, but they're just different. And so we're coming into a different generation of firefighter.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Do you feel like when you were in those positions, as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, making decisions, but not really, do you feel like there was a moment where you realized like the awesome responsibility you had, and then like kind of dove into taking yourself up to another level? Did something make that click to you at all?
It wasn't when I was that young.
Okay.
I wanted to be a paramedic, and so I spent a lot of my time working on the medic unit. Our program had paramedic assistants, so you'd have to go through a month-long training, and this is before intermediate IV and all the other stuff that's kind of out there in the rural areas today. But so I had a paramedic partner that I worked with. They did all the skills, and I was there to support them. So I had to know the medications, do all these things. And so I had a lot of responsibility on that aspect of it, working on the medic unit. And and that was my desire to go to medic school. In fact, any of my buddies that from our area listening, not very many of them knew that I was destined to go to medic school. But it was a lieutenant that I was working with after I got hired, and paramedic school fell through again, trying to use my department to go to paramedic school. And she said, "You are an incredible instructor and you have these leadership qualities. I think you should screw paramedic school and you should be focusing on being a company officer." And that really hit me because that wasn't what I was thinking about. And yeah, from that point on, I gave up on the paramedic idea and just started going to college and figuring out what I need to do to be a good company officer, and started lining up individuals that I really admired as company officers, one of them being Janet, and really started figuring out what's it going to take for me to be a leader. And that led on to, many, many different things.
And what age was that, and how long into your fire service career was that?
Yeah. I believe I got promoted when I was 25 to lieutenant. So I was pretty young.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Trying to do the math really quick as I'm going through this.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, I think it was either 24 or 25 when I got promoted, but um, that was that was some growing that went on because the department was growing so quickly. Expectations were being pushed higher, and what we knew and what we learned and how I was taking on the role or what I was trying to take on the role, it was changing really quickly. And this is kind of like where my relationship with my driver, Chad Berg, he drove for me for about 17 years, I think is what it was. And our relationship is incredible. And that's when I first started working with Chad, and it was this dynamic duel. And I kind of give you the reason why I call it the dynamic duel. But we really started to look at like, how do we have an impact in the firefighters, or how do we have an impact in our organization? And it was through the younger firefighters. I figured out I'm not going to be able to change the older firefighters that are here, the company officers. They're ingrained in what they want, and I'm too young. They're not going to give me the time of day. But if I take my time and effort with the young firefighters coming in, part-timers, volunteer, and new hires, if we put our time and effort into them, show them the love, show them the attention, give them the attention, then we pretty much have the way to influence the organization by driving that direction. I used to say, just infect them. We infect them. It's like if you want to destroy the hive, you infect the bees and they'll destroy their own hive. And dynamic duo came from our ops chief at the time. Chad and I had worked together for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. And we were teaching together. We were doing all these things together. And the ops chief told our battalion chief, I don't care who is where, but Chad and Rob need to be broken up. When I see Chad, I always see Rob. When I see Rob, I always see Chad, and that's got to stop. And so he called us the dynamic duo, and so they broke us up for a year, and we got back together. So
Oh, that's good at least. So, was it a good reason to break you up, or was it really just to break you up? You know what I mean? Was it trying to like
yeah,
spread both of your, or you guys had a great mindset and all that, and try to spread it to more? Nope, just to break you up.
yeah, it was. He was heavily in. He came from the military side of things, and so in the military, at least from his years in the military, I mean, it's all changed now, but leaders did not fraternize with members of the crew. So for me and Chad to be together and roll up to the station because we're going to go teach a class, that's how the chief saw it at that time. The ops chief saw it at that time. So he's like, I want them separated. So Chad went to go and drive an engine. I stayed on the ladder and was an officer and had a new driver. And but to the point of like we were growing really quickly as an organization, and we were growing as well as as I was growing as a leader, and Chad was growing as we didn't really have senior firefighters because it was a three-person company. So there was the officer, there was my driver, and then we had essentially we had a day firefighter and a resident that came in at night or was on at night, and then we had one firefighter when it finally we didn't have the residents, and so you had a brand new firefighter, a driver, and an officer. So the driver played the role of senior man, and Chad was a really good senior man. We had an awesome work um, dynamic. He had the bay, that was his office. He got to do anything that involved the bay, and I had the office and everything else on the interior of the station. And we played good cop and bad cop all the time. We'd meet. I'm like, hey, I'm having a hard time with this. Oh, I'll talk to him, and he'd take care of it, and vice versa. So it was great.
Yeah, it's invaluable for sure to have that kind of dynamic. Even in a small company, I appreciate hearing that. You're a 3-person company. That's speaking my language up where I'm at. I don't think anybody's a 4-person company. And I know, like you said, you had residents come in and that kind of stuff. But obviously, there's a little bit of inconsistency, I guess, with that sometimes too. So, but yeah, were you and Chad close in age and time on, or farther apart?
Let's see. He's 40. I'm 55, and he's 49. I think he's going
Okay.
to be 50. So, 5, 6 years
Yeah, that's pretty
difference, and
close. Yeah.
he came in a few years after I did. But yeah, I mean, the really cool thing was just I think when you're looking at it from leadership's point of view, we were doing in our small organization, because we didn't necessarily know, we were doing what was changing in the United States military. I mean, leadership in the military has changed dramatically in the last 20 years compared to like the old days of Vietnam and Korea and World War II. And when you look at some of the great leaders out of the military, General Mattis and all, they're like, they talk about family, they talk about treating their people like family, and they talk about being just like them. I mean, it was exactly what we were doing. It's like there was no separation between me. I had some administrative duties and I had more responsibility, but it was like I was loading hose if we were on an engine. I was throwing ladders. I was doing everything that they were doing. There was no standing back. And when you're on a smaller company of, three person company, you pretty much you're a working officer. You don't have the luxury of being able to step back and kind of watch. So, um, but that was kind of going on early on in our career.
Oh, that's really cool. And to, I mean, 25. That's obviously that's relatively young for that kind of responsibility. From the time you got promoted to the time you promoted again out of that position, what would you say would be the biggest change that you've had in that time span as an officer?
The biggest change that I had as an officer from when I was promoted
Promoted
to
to
lieutenant.
lieutenant, and then now, because I know you promoted after that,
Yeah.
up another rank. What was one thing that maybe you grew to have as part of, I don't know, your mentality or anything like that?
Well, I will say that I wasn't always a good company officer, and it was my way or the highway approach to a lot of things. Now, while I would get dirty and be a part of all of the ruckus and do the cleaning and everything else, I was pretty much dead set that as we were developing a truck culture in our organization, and it'd be like I'd go to the mat on everything. It was like if I had my mind set on something, it'd be like there's no changing it. And I mean, that changed while I was a lieutenant. I was starting to learn that at the end of my days. And I was at the end of my company officer days, I was captain in training and I went to a couple different places. And so I had some stints away from the company that was kind of more administrative and, a higher perspective, looking at some things from different angles. And that totally all changed. When I became a BC, then um, while I have the ability to this is the way it's going to be, I found that I had a better influence when I involved all my officers in making decisions. And I started learning that from our who ended up becoming our ops chief. He was my battalion chief early on, Eric Andrews, and he gave trust to us as company officers all the time. He just like, you know what? I'll tell you, here's what I want. I want to make sure what we do is in the best interest of the public, is, somewhat safe. We are in the fire service, but I want you guys to be, you guys figure it out. Just get to the end and you guys make the decision. He did that with us all the time. And so as a young company officer, I had a hard time doing that. I didn't trickle it down the way he did. And then when I became captain and then going up into BC, it was what I did all the time. Um, there would be some things I'm like, let me give you my perspective and my experience on this. And if it doesn't sway you, then let's do it your way and we're going to see how it goes. And we'll go from there. And when people have skin in the game, they'll they'll battle for you. And I think this is one of the leadership problems that we have is that leaders don't realize the impact of just extending grace at times and extending trust to their people and letting their people do it their way. Now, we're talking going back to the generational gaps. There's some different approaches to things, and some of them are, unorthodox compared to what a traditional. But I tell you what, I'd rather give them the opportunity to get the growth out of that. And either way, I'm a winner because if it works and it's better, then that's awesome. And they got growth out of it. If it didn't work and my way is better, they got growth out of it. So I'm winning
Yeah,
either way.
yeah. No, it's a great approach. Letting people. I love how you said when they got skin in the game. Like it's the absolute truth, and it's funny how it sounds like rocket science to some people, but really, like, I feel like that message is really starting to catch on a lot more within leadership in the fire service in general, like crew resource management and that kind of like vibe.
Yeah.
With, right, letting people do things. I think one of the best things I heard is the best thing a chief can do is say yes. Right. It's easy to
Yeah.
say. It's easy to say yes. You just
Well,
have to do it.
a lot of the leadership books, especially the military ones, I mean, like Mattis and um, oh, can't remember the other ones that I've read in the last few years, but they all talk about the same thing, and that is just, trust in your people, let your people do their job,
Yeah.
stand back, and let them go. You lay out the vision, and you be very clear what the vision is, but don't be so particular about how things need to go. There's times and places for it, but when there isn't the time and the place for it, do not hold to that type of tactic. It's like using conventional construction tactics or tactics in conventional construction in a engineered constructed building. It's like that's how you're going to get hurt or killed. So you got to change the way you're inducing things. So um yeah, yeah, I think things are getting better in the American Fire Service because a lot of the leadership books. I mean, Corley Moore's 9Ls is awesome. I mean, there's a lot of really good fire service leadership books out. And when you look at their books, they're reading and they're basically distilling down a lot of what has been written out of the military. Military has, you know, some of the best
Oh
leaders
yeah.
because they get put in some really hairy positions and they're taught to be great leaders. If it's West Point or wherever they're going to Annapolis, they have some of the best instructors that are helping these cadets, become officers and decision makers. And then they get to go and work in a battleground that they get to experience it. And that's kind of like the key thing. If it's really hard to be a really good leader when you're in an organization that doesn't have any opportunity for you to lead. You might have a lot of opportunity to help people with training and guide people and mentor them and so on and so forth, and you work that muscle. But it's kind of like the whole thing is like, man, don't forget leg day.
Yeah.
And when you don't have calls, significant calls that you have, you're just you're. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I haven't been on the job in 5 months, and I'd love to go back and command a fire, but I know I'd be a little bit different than what I did 5 months ago. It's only been 5 months.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
Um, when I left the ladder company and I'd come back after being gone for about a year in the training division on a stint, I'd come back and it would take me about a few months to get my legs underneath me and get back into the groove of things. So if you don't get those calls, you don't get the opportunity to kind of exercise that skill. The military, they get to exercise that skill on a regular basis. That's why they're so good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's an excellent point for sure. And I love what you said too with you know, not that we're necessarily going to plug Corley's book all the time, but really like the way it digests it for a fireman to be able to read is so much better because you could take things like Abershoff's book and there's what is it? There's another one about New Zealand. That's not military, but what is it? The All Blacks.
Oh yeah.
That was another really great like leadership book, and you take those principles and you kind of put them in a fireman talk, and that message is starting to make a lot more sense now. So it's really cool to see that. And I haven't been in the fire service that long. I think I'm like my 14th year, and I've seen a total change in the way that leadership is being presented, and
Mhm.
it's because of stuff like that. It's really cool to see. So you promote into the BC car, and I thought I remember hearing you on another podcast, talking about that transition a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I remember you saying that you were kind of holding out to do that promotion because you loved being on the truck so much, you loved that job, right? And what was that transition like, and what ultimately made you decide to promote to the next level?
Well, I don't know if I did say that or not, or if
I can't
that's
remember, so I don't
um,
want to put words in your mouth, but
that's all right. I will tell you this. I had tested for battalion 5 times, I think, and I did really well on all the tests. We
yeah,
just weren't promoting battalions. So I mean, I pretty much had set in my mind that I wanted to be a battalion chief probably about, my guess would be about 10 years into being a company officer.
Then that's my
I love
mistake. I apologize. I thought I
it's
remembered hearing that.
yeah, I did. I mean, I probably said that because it always comes up as like, what's the best job in the fire service? And most individuals will say it's company officer. And what I have said is, it's the best job is the position you're currently in. Otherwise, you shouldn't be there,
Yeah.
right? And you shouldn't have tested for it. Now I know that there are times that you get, you kind of get squeezed and you have to take a position. You're like, man, I'm better than the two other idiots that are gonna potentially test for it. But and I have said that I loved my time on the ladder truck. Absolutely loved my time on the ladder truck, and it was tough leaving it. But I knew that the next the next journey for me and the next challenge was becoming a battalion chief and doing that for. I figured I was going to do that for 10 years when I got promoted, and then I just cut my time short. Weren't things weren't going good for me, and it was time for me to go. The department was changing, and I was starting to get bitter, and I was like, well, guess what? It's time to go. But I loved being a company officer on the ladder truck.
Yeah.
I'd go back if my body would allow me to. I'd go back in a heartbeat, but it's tough work.
Oh, I can imagine. I'm so jealous of that. My department doesn't have a truck, and when I was volunteering, paid on call, we had one, and it was a blast. And I miss it all the time. I miss being on a ladder. It was so much fun. Just the work you got to do, and just the knowledge that you had to have. And you talk about like forgetting it. I haven't been on a truck in 7 years, and I don't remember a lot of that stuff. I was a pretty decent operator back then, and it leaves you. Like some of the building
Yeah.
construction's got to stay because even if we only have engines, truck work's still got to get done. But yeah,
Well, I will say that I know if any of the local guys are listening, I have said this out in public before, but I think the separator in a really good battalion chief when you're testing out of company officer is one that has spent some time on the ladder truck. I mean, you mentioned building construction, and we all should know building construction, but I think it's the ladder companies that really have to delve into, really dive into building construction and understand it, and you're playing with it more, right?
yeah.
You're dealing with it more. So it's kind of like your forte next to search and ground ladder work and and such. But I think the best battalion chiefs get to spend that time on the ladder truck, and so you look at and I've asked like buddies like Ray McCormick from FDNY and others in fire service all across the nation is like, do you have to spend time on a ladder truck to promote the battalion, especially in the bigger departments that have a lot of ladder trucks? And in my department, the downfall is we only had one ladder truck. So with, at the time it was 7 stations in one ladder truck. It didn't make it available. I mean, I wasn't leaving the ladder truck. I was there to stay.
Yeah.
But so our rotation didn't allow for more company officers to be on it. But what I've told my company officers when we were getting ready for testing for battalion, I'm like, get on the ladder truck and get some time on the ladder truck because it's going to change your perspective. And it's going to help you be a better battalion. But going back to my point about the departments that have a lot of ladder trucks, LAFD is the only one that I know that you're required to work on a ladder truck to promote up through the ranks because you have Captain 1, Captain 2, and Captain 1 works on an engine and Captain 2 is a task force commander. I might have that term wrong, but they basically working on the ladder truck, which is in a task force. And then you promote to battalion chief. And so you get time on the ladder truck. Outside of that, FDNY, you can be a captain on an engine before you go to battalion and never worked on a ladder truck in your life. But that's just the tie with building construction.
No, you're spot on. Like I said, I wish I mean, I was younger, but I wish I would have really grasped the responsibility of building construction as a truck. So like when I was volunteer and the station that I was a volunteer at was a ladder. And so that was like, you show up, I'm on the ladder. It was a 6-person engine. And it was at that time, everyone showed up for callbacks or sorry, 6-person ladder. So it was always full. And it was most of the public works guys that were POC. And those guys were building construction gurus
Yeah.
because they built a lot of stuff in the town and all that, and uh, it, some of that stuff filtered down in my direction. But I you know, uh, I wish I would have really pulled at those threads a little bit more at that time, especially now that I don't even have a ladder truck, and I'll probably never see one in my department, to be honest. But not that I'm dumping my purse here, but
Well, you don't. I mean, there's a lot of great departments that don't have any ladder
that
companies,
is true. That is true.
and the benefit is that everybody has to be good, or at least has to have a good understanding of it. And I mean, the good is that everybody's going to understand a little element of it and get a little bit of it
Yeah.
because they're going to be third due or whatever, however your department works with when the truck duties are going to be done. But when you do have a dedicated ladder truck, it does really help out, or multiple in a department, it's even better.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and
because then
especially
your focus is different.
yeah, like I can imagine you in the car. You know, if you want to know something about the building, who are you going to send? You're going to send that truck company, right, to go figure out the type of construction, the integrity, all those things. Like
Yeah.
that's what that person does, you know. And when you specialize like that, or specialize probably isn't the right word, but I guess maybe it is.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility to a certain extent. So, in the battalion chief car, so how many BCs were in your department? Just you, or was it like multiple? How did that work?
When I
Meaning,
left,
not
right,
I mean per shift, right? So not necessarily like if you had three shifts. Obviously, there'd be three battalion chiefs, but like, did you operate where there was more than one battalion chief and like district chiefs? I'm not totally sure the dynamic of your department.
yeah, we were a suburban department north of Seattle by about 25-30 miles in Snohomish County, and we were as we merged through the years, the last few years of my career, we were up to 10 stations. We had 11 stations. We lost another station to the neighboring department. The city decided to go the other way, but we were 10 stations, and we had three battalions in those 10 stations. Because of the way the merger was, geographically, we were kind of spread out a little bit. So the North Battalion, we had an East Battalion and a West Battalion. And I, for the most part, worked my entire career, and my department was the West Battalion. And when I got promoted to BC, I went over to the East Battalion, which is a different department, had a turn of the century construction in a main street. Where I grew up, it was all newer. It was modern. We were dealing with engineered construction. We had some old, probably 1940s homes, but that's about it. We really didn't have older construction. Everything was built in the late 70s to early 80s, or not everything, but a good portion of that's when the area started to grow. So West Battalion was engineered construction. We did go to neighboring departments on the ladder truck that had, more conventional, older construction. But when I went as a battalion to the East Battalion, I was in a mix of everything. So I had stuff that was turn of the century, and I had stuff that was built just, last week. So what was really cool is three battalions. We didn't have a duty chief that responsible for all of us. The way our calls ran, usually two of the battalions were on the same call together if it was a significant call. So that left one of the other battalions to kind of backfill and do all the other stuff for us. But yeah, I was really fortunate to have the other three. And then our neighboring departments. We all kind of got on the same shift, so we saw the same battalions. So in between the North and the East and West Battalion was another department. Their battalions are on our shift. North of the North Battalion, their battalions are on our shift. The city was different, but the other county, they have three battalions as well. So when you looked at it, 3, 6, 7, 8, I think 9 battalions were all on the same shift. So we didn't go to calls together very often because that would be significant alarms. But we were functioning as a larger organization, but we were all individual departments.
Wow. And so, how did that relationship develop? Was that from you guys? Was that above you guys? How did you develop all of that?
Are you talking about the battalion relationships,
Yeah,
or
you
just how our departments?
sounds like all those battalions all had a obviously like a connection, and you were able to operate pretty trustworthily. That's not even a word, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean. How did that come to be? Like, how much time did that take to develop a relationship like that?
I mean, in most cases, a lot of the guys, trying to think if there were any gals that were promoted to battalion at that time. Chief Jaeger was the only female battalion that I can remember. But we all came through the ranks together. A lot of us went to the academy together. We taught together. We attended classes together. Our college, we went to college together. So there's relationships that were built through, on the outside of things. And then really one of the things that did help us is blue card. Our departments decided to bring in blue card. I mean, our departments before blue card were everybody kind of did their own little thing, and I'm not complaining because I'd go to any fire. I mean, you don't if you don't want to use blue card, I won't use blue card. I'm not passing up an opportunity to go to a fire, and I can figure it out. You just use common language, and I,
Yeah.
I know what you want. But um, so when we all went to blue card, it really took all of the language and basically we're all speaking the same language, which then that helped on the fire ground. We weren't strategically and tactically the same, I don't think. I think each department was a little bit different. Departments were growing at the time. Some departments were not as I don't want to say aggressive, but they just handled fires a little bit differently, even though we were talking the same. And then they changed. And then the other thing that really helped us out is we used to all go to the Washington State Fire Academy. And when we put together the Snohomish County Fire Academy, now we were teaching all of the firefighters exactly the same stuff. It didn't matter what department you were going to, they all got the same. So now that started changing tactically how we worked on the fire ground because like my former department, well, former before we merged too, we were one of the first ones to have bulk beds or static beds of hose, and everybody's like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" And now, I think generally speaking, in Snohomish County, every department has at least one or two static beds of hose. I mean, there's still pre-connects that are out there, but we started to see a lot of change because it was the more versatility of having a bulk bed. We were the first ones to have smoothbore nozzles, and then that changed, and now just about every department in the county has smoothbore nozzles. So it was changing us on the fire ground. Um, and then, and of course, once we got all on the same shift, that really helped out. And then really probably the last piece, and this was in the last 2 years of or last year of my career, is the ops chiefs. Well, actually, two things. About the last 2 or 3 years of my career, one of the departments put together what they called it was regional command. It was like a regional command meeting, and it was every battalion, every chief officer, ops chief, training chief, not only from Snohomish County it was open to, but even the surrounding King County departments, so the neighboring county were invited, and we'd all be in the same room, and we'd get training, and we'd go over fires, we'd review things. I mean, that had a big impact on where we were going, and then that led to the county putting together our run car or our fire response list, and basically what we sent to a residential fire, we were all sending the same things. Two chiefs, four engines, a truck, a couple of medic units, and MSO, which is kind of a EMS chief officer.
Okay.
And so now everybody was sending the same resources. So now we were getting more aligned. Our commercial resources were, bigger than that. And then one of the last committees I chaired before leaving was the mid high rise committee, and we adopted about a year before I left the mid high rise document for all of Snohomish County. So now we were working for mid high rise stuff. We were working under one document.
Wow. I mean that's that's a long process, right? But you're kind of like what's the phrase? You boil water from the bottom up, right? It seems like all the stars just kind of started to line up in the right spot. That's
Yeah.
really cool to hear, like a success story like that.
Yeah. It was my hope that before I left, we'd have a Snohomish County Fire Department. But right now we have South County Fire. They're 15 stations. My former department, Snohomish Regional, there are 10 stations. Snohomish has three stations. Marysville, beyond us, has 5 stations, and North County has think 5 or 6 stations, and then um, there's Tulalip. Oh, well, I can't remember what they're calling themselves now. Bay, anyways, and they've got a couple stations. So all of these basically are all functioning the same, generally speaking. And I mean, it'll just be a matter of time, and some chief officers getting out of the way and letting it continue to grow. That it will be a Snohomish County Fire Department.
I'm hoping for that where I'm at too, at least some sort of county type. I mean, are you familiar with Mabus? That's like our
Yeah,
whole
the
spiel up
alarm.
here. The alarm. So like we basically operate knowing who's going to show up anyway.
Yep.
It's not even on an initial alarm we're getting mutual aid immediately. So like we're already kind of there. It's just getting tactics and getting training and those things all on the same page. And
Yeah.
so like a 3 battalion chief department for me, I've never worked for a department like that. And like for us, we our mutual aid chiefs, it's a chief. It's never a battalion chief. You know what I mean? It's always a
Yeah.
chief officer. So like, it's usually not like a boots on the ground type person that comes in, even mutual aid to us. So, when you guys within your department, with the battalion chiefs, if you went into another district's for a fire, and part of my ignorance because I'm not totally sure how this stuff works. Command position wise, would you did they put you or other battalion chiefs in like safety or like an interior type thing? Like, were you kind of working in forward command positions, or did you? How did that structure build out?
Before I answer that, but if anybody from the county is listening, I forgot about the city of Everett, which is 6 stations. One of the issues that you were talking about mutual aid, and um, early in my days, everybody's kingdom, so you wouldn't call for mutual aid.
Yeah,
In fact, if another department was coming into your area, a lot of the chiefs would be like, "Send them home. We don't need them." And it was this like ego thing, and I'm glad that kind of changed because we weren't serving the public the best when we were, trying to fight our domains and all the stupid shit that chiefs are doing. But to answer your question about the two chiefs, like on a residential fire, I mean, a lot of the times in the West Battalion, I'd go with South County's battalion, or they would be coming with me because just the way that the area was, it would send the two closest chiefs. So while I had two other battalions in my department that could respond, primarily I responded with the neighboring department's battalion and vice versa. So it was pretty much in a way blue card in our county was working is um, we didn't have a safety chief, which is nice. I'm glad that was one change that I was glad to see when with blue card we removed the safety chief out of that, and it was more important for us to put a forward, a tactical boss. And so if you were first arriving, you were going to be the IC, and then the other battalion chief would get there. Um, if the fire hadn't started de-escalating, if the incident wasn't going down, then you're going to be put into a forward position, be, division as in floors. You're going to be Division 3 or Division 2, or if you're going to be, a Charlie division. I was not a big fan because some of the chiefs would give the forward boss Alpha Division and essentially just turn the whole fire over to them, and then they would just talk to dispatch and request additional resources and handle the incoming units and assign them as accordingly. But there were some chiefs that did that, and I mean, I loved it when I was the second arriving chief because then it was my fire. But I wouldn't normally do that.
yeah,
I'd keep them with me if I didn't need them. And a lot of the times it'd be like if the incident is de-escalated, I'm like, hey man, we just give me another walk around, make sure we haven't missed anything, and just make sure all the crews are looking good and that there's nothing that I need to be worried about. And I'd say, hey man, just have a seat in the rig. I didn't want to get rid of them right away because if we had like a mayday or
yeah.
firefighter goes down, then it would give me that extra boss to like create a rescue group or create a division that they can then manage the mayday in. Yeah, that's basically how we did it. And then if we were on the larger alarms, I mean, some of the benefits would, if it was like right in the area, I mean, sometimes I'd go east because I'm like, I think I can almost beat that second battalion there. And we had the luxury of being able to do that. I just join anyways. And so you'd go to a residential fire. A couple of my last fires that I went on, they were in the East Battalion, and like, Chief, what are you doing here? I said, well, it had a burn victim. It sounded good. So I got here. So we had three chiefs. And well, what are you here for? I'm like, one last picture with the rest of you guys. I've only got a few more days left. So,
Oh, that's awesome. But
yeah.
but still, like, there's value in having those command positions, especially by someone who is still like part of the crew in a way, right? As a battalion chief or something at that level. Not knocking chiefs that come on scene and fill those positions, but usually a battalion chief, or in my area, sometimes that's considered a captain. They're still more connected with it, and you can send them inside, and they've probably drilled with the crew, or they've probably been around those things, and those eyes are super important. I'm seeing that shift in my area. That was not a thing. It was established safety right away,
Yeah.
and like staging, and then there was never like a forward boss. So then like the lieutenant would be inside with one person, and then the next lieutenant would be inside with one person, and those two would kind of collaborate, and having that traffic cop, I guess, is how we've kind of phrased it somewhat up here, is like a benefit to have that person at least be able to coordinate between those two. Hey, what do you need? And get them off the radio and let them work. I'm That's a positive shift. It's cool that you guys operated that way. So
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I didn't like everything that Blue Card had to offer, but there was a couple things that I really liked, and one of them was the emphasis on the forward boss, and that just wasn't because I was, a chief officer. That actually all that occurred before I became a chief officer. So, but it helped me out as a company officer having, a chief, and to your point about they're connected more. Like, it really kept the battalions kind of dialed in on, skookum on putting on a pack, because you basically, it got down to the point where we were basically at that regional meeting training that we were doing. It's like, hey, remember, if you're going to be the second arrive in BC, do not come to the effing command post in your class Bs.
yeah,
You better be bunked up, ready to go, because with your SCBA and your tactical board, your division board, so that we can basically, if I need you, I can just assign you. And so it really started to hold the battalions to be a little bit more in tune to things, and it helped out the company officers, because it took that weight off the company officers' shoulders. Because what we would do back in the day, we did the same thing. We had a safety officer, and it was just, it was a BS position. They weren't. I think the biggest thing a safety officer does is when they're looking at larger buildings, especially the older construction. Like, man, I'm seeing a crack that I do not like. That's where the safety officer is. But what we were experiencing as safety officers is, hey, that climbing angle is wrong. And you're going like, I'm not going to change the climbing angle. I'm climbing the ladder right now. Those types of things. It was stupid stuff. But what it did is putting battalions. Because the other thing we'd also do is two things. One, we'd take a company officer off the company, create a division with them, and so that left their driver and their firefighter. And we wanted to keep the company officers with the crew. I mean,
yeah,
that's why we pay them. And so putting the chief in a chief officer to do that really helped out. The other thing we would do in the old days would be piggyback companies. So it'd be like, ladder 72, we're going to give you engine 43. And then they'd be piggybacked on. So I'd have to answer for them. And I had engine 43 under me. So it was just another way of creating kind of like a division, or it was more like a group
yeah,
where we had a functional responsibility, just like, hey, search this area or overhaul this whole area or whatever it was. And then I just answered for all the radio traffic command. By putting the chief there, then it reduces the radio traffic, because if we're doing it right, the chief knows exactly what needs to go on in that division. And then they're yelling at the crews from the front door, or, like, hey, LT, come here. And so they kind of come out like, hey, make sure you get this done. I'm going to do this. Well, I need another company. All right, I'll get you another company. And that doesn't have to go over the radio. And then, command from Division A, send me one more company. And so it improved things a lot.
yeah, yeah. I'm totally buying that. Like, the fire service that I grew up around did not have that. I mean, we had, like I said, it was a safety officer that was outside and kind of did exactly what you're talking about. Like, it was
Yeah.
not really anything beyond that. And then it would build out. Like, water supply would become a thing. There'd usually be like a chief's liaison, and there was never anybody inside, even when I was a company officer. And like, it would hit a point where you were you weren't focused on your task anymore, and you were trying to remember where the hell everybody else was. And I talk about it too much on the show, but maybe not because I love this. But the class that I got to go take through IFSI is called RIT Under Fire, and it's all RIT. It's all live fire, live victims, like this whole. And what they did the first class I went to, they implemented a RIT chief, and so you actually had a chief who had went through the class, and they were managing multiple RIT crews inside to make these rescues. And there were people that were like, this is my second time through this class, and it made all the difference in the world of just having that one person for you to be able to turn back to and be like, hey, chief, and I need blank, and then they would get you it. It's cool that, again, that's starting to become more commonplace. People are realizing those things. You mentioned marrying companies. We did that too for the longest time, and it's like, it's too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, I mean, if I was working at Chicago or FDNY or any of the
Sure.
big urban cities, they don't have this issue, and so it's really it goes. I mean, it's kind of like the conversation of a three-person engine company or three-person truck company. Well, that guess what? That's the American Fire Service, and I
Yeah.
know that there's companies out there that work with two and one, and there's definitely the big urban that are running with four, five, and six on their companies. But the reality is, the American Fire Service is a three-person company in a suburban department with limited resources, relatively speaking. And so to make the effort to focus two chief officers to those positions, it is awesome. I mean, like another example is in the rural areas where we're protecting, we'll do tender or tanker operations, whatever you want to call them. But we do tender operations, so we create a water supply officer, and that is the second due chief that takes care of the water supply to, make sure that the shuttle is going good and get an idea, set up the portable tank or whatever needs to be done. And that makes for a smooth running fire. Now that puts more responsibility on me as the IC, and I might ask for another chief, or I might get lucky and another chief comes in. And if like another point I wanted to make is like from the battalion chiefs in the county that I was working in, I think generally speaking, if there was a significant multiple alarm commercial fire, I mean, three alarms, I don't think any of the ops chiefs in the higher ranking chiefs would come in and take command away from the BCs. I think I can speak from my department. I know that the assistant chief of operations and the deputy chief of operations and the deputy chief of training would not come in and take the fire away. They would be kind of more like the liaisons and support me and like, hey, I'll scribe for you, or I'll call all the resources, or I'll call the chiefs, or do whatever it needs. Or I'll call the media, or I'll take care of this, or I'll take care of that. So that really does help, and that's those are things that you get in the larger departments. But if we had a rural fire where I'd have that second chief like on water supply, and maybe the deputy chief of that department comes in, I'm like, will you take over water supply so I can move him or her into that yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it worked out great. So I mean, those are some of the really good changes in my span of my career, to go from a two-station department to a 10-station department with three battalion chiefs function. Is like, that was cool growth to see in 36 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, it's another. Your story is another a reason to emphasize that those four command positions. Like my department's not a blue card department. South county south of mine is pretty much all blue card, and then maybe one or two departments in my area are. But like, it's starting to kind of infect the area, and a lot of, like, you hit on another thing about like chiefs coming over and taking over the fire from the battalion chief. Like, that's not as common anymore. They'll go find a position. Chiefs putting on air packs in my area was not a thing for a long time, and now it's starting to become one. So
Yeah.
it's a really cool shift to see all over the country. Not
It, it's part of the generational change. I mean, I
yeah,
grew up doing all these things and watching, and it was a little bit different. And I just got to think, as I was a company officer, going, what would I want the chief to do for me? And then so then you start, as you're getting up to those ranks, you try to make that change, try to kind of lead up a little bit. And it didn't happen too often. I mean, some of the battalions that I worked for, I had decent battalions, as a company officer, but we could only we could only influence them so much, and mold them in a certain way. But then once you got there, it's like, hell, if I could do it, this is what I would do. And it wasn't to like, hey, I want to be in the fire. It was like, man, I could help as a forward boss. I could help out the crews that are in there. I could have three companies that are in there, an attack company and two companies doing search. It'd be great, and it takes a load off of the IC.
Yeah, well, because you've experienced it from the inside, right? Of
Yep.
like somebody going, "What do you need? I need you to leave me alone and let me do my job." Like
Yeah.
that's really what it became, and yeah, it's definitely a cool shift. I got an audience question,
Oh wow.
and also Grant Williams says you need to wear more sunscreen, but but you're in Vegas now, right? Isn't that what? Right? Didn't I hear that? So you're probably getting
Yeah.
scorched all the time there.
Yeah, I went outside to get about 15, 20 minutes of sun without sunblock, and I probably went about 5 minutes longer than I wanted to, but it was 107 today,
Jeez.
108, I think, 108 today. So,
My God.
but I was standing at the pool. I didn't get in the pool. I was going to get in the pool tonight after. I'll probably get in the pool tonight. It's going to be probably still 100 degrees right now. Let me see.
My God.
And the pool temperature is usually a few, it was 88 the other day. Yeah, it's 103. So
I was gonna make
plenty of time to get in the pool.
a Midwest blood joke, but you were up in Washington, so like you're probably living some of that transition too, right? Like Washington couldn't have been climate wise. I mean, that's a big
Oh,
like
oh yeah, yeah. I was born and raised in Washington,
yeah.
and the only reason why we came to Vegas is our son went to school down here and then got married, and our two grandkids are down here, and so him, his wife, and the grandkids are like, well, when we retire, where are we going to be? And so my wife and I decided we're going to go to Vegas. I'm like, oh man, this is the surface of the sun.
Yeah.
But I've gotten better at it. You manage it. It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I definitely love being able to get out. I mean, like this morning, I went out for a walk and I went over to the pickleball courts. We're in a 55 and older community, so they have six pickleball courts with these, highly skilled elderly pickleball players. And I walked by just to kind of see what the talent is looking like on the courts. And it's almost 90 degrees, at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's at 8 o'clock in the morning. So you get all your shit done early in the morning and you're inside and then come out back at night.
I was thinking about going to Texas and changing fire departments and doing all that stuff. And my wife and I went on a cruise last year, and we got out of Houston. And she looks at me and she goes, "You want to do this here?" And I was like, "Yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty tough fireman, but holy shit, like
Yeah.
those guys, that's unreal, man." But
Yeah, I mean, look at it this way. I'm a retired guy that wears shorts all the time, that have flip-flops on. I'm not in gear. I'm not wearing I don't know how they do it. I do not know how they do it. All right. To the
no,
question.
you're
I'm
all
sorry.
good. I know. So, Josh Colper was talking about discourse in the fire service. He says he's curious about your view uh, on on it now that you're retired, that you've spoken on it in the past, and that you have some great views. So it's more of a talking point necessarily than but
Oh man, discourse. I was full of discourse, and that's probably as part of my reputation, I would think, in my region. I did a lot of fighting, not physically, but and I think discourse is good. I wasn't always respectful with it, and that was a maturity thing. But I think that discourse is good for growth. That's how you get change. And when you believe in something, and you have a conviction, I think it's important. The battle is that if you have really good leadership, you're probably going to have less discourse. I would think, because really good leaders are like really into their people. Um, I think ego gets in the way, and which causes a lot of discourse. So, like, I disagree with the way leadership of my organization was going, and so I would do everything I could to try to change it, and then when you get to the end where you really have no influence and they're just kind of marginalize you out, and so you're like, then you're like, all right, this is how I see things. Like, well, it's not good to be talking about that. The chief doesn't like that. I'm like, I don't really give a shit what the chief thinks. And that's where it kind of starts getting disrespectful. But on the serious side of it is like, if the chief was really good or if the leadership was really good, that we probably wouldn't be in that position. So I think discourse is good for shaving ego, and sometimes you gotta fight fire with fire, and um, I'm not against it. And I will tell you, as a company officer, there was a couple of really good heated debates with my driver, who I highly respect, and I was wrong probably in all of them. And that just goes to show the reason why there was discourse was because my ego got in the way, or I was not doing what a good leader should do, and that should sit back, be curious about what's going on. I don't agree with your opinion, but I'm not going to tell you what my opinion is. And to show, I mean, this is Ted Lasso talks about it. And if you watch any of the Ted Lassos, I was like, don't be judgmental, be curious. And it's like, start asking more questions. When you disagree with something, and get your emotion out of it and start asking questions, start figuring out, where the hell are you going with this thing? And if I would have done that, I probably would have avoided at least the three at the lower level with my driver. And then as a battalion chief, I think I started getting the hang of it, and I don't think I had a lot of discourse with my company officers. Um, I mean, I don't want to pat my back, and I was an engaged firefighter, an engaged company officer, and definitely an engaged battalion. So whatever they were bringing to me, I pretty much knew what was going to be bullshit and what was like, no, that might work. And as long as I didn't let my ego get in the way, and I went, well, let's give it a shot. That might work. Um, it eliminated it. So hopefully that answers. Was it Josh?
It was yeah, Josh.
Josh. Hopefully that answers your question, Josh. Thanks. It was a good question.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a great talking point, right, about growth through some of that and experiencing it not just from your superiors necessarily, but you yourself, were able to reflect upon that. So, yeah, I mean, discourse is everywhere in the fire service and really just every job in general, right? And
Discourse is in society.
yeah, it's not like it's exclusive to us, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm gonna circle back. We got on rabbit holes, and I love it
Oh,
because I have barely even looked at my notes.
what are we,
But
like two questions into
I don't
the
even know.
24 that you gave me?
We're just gonna wait. Well, they're not all real questions. They're just kind of. But it's like you see Pirates of the Caribbean, right? It's guidelines more than actual rules, right? It's just
Yeah.
to keep my scatterbrain from going off on too much. But one question I really love asking because I think it's important is early in your career, most of us either latch on or someone finds us and gives us what we need. And we don't always get a chance to say thank you. If we do, that's really great. If not, I love asking a question about somebody young, your career, somebody that got a lot out of early in your career. They influenced you the most early in your career.
Well, any of the guys that are from my area that are listening, I mean, they'll know two of these individuals really well, or at least back in the old days. The first one was Janet Jaeger. She was the first firefighter hired in Snohomish County, and she was good. She was she was solid. And I came in, I was a resident, and so I knew of her early on. And then when I got hired, I was fortunate to be riding backwards for her. She was a lieutenant. And then I followed her when she went to one of the new stations we opened up, and I drove for her, and it was awesome. She was very compassionate. She was the one that said, "Screw paramedic school. You have a way of sharing knowledge and instructing, and you're going to be a great leader, and you should be a company officer, and maybe chief of the department." She always said, "I'm going to be working for you one day." But so she had a lot of confidence in me. She showed compassion. She showed, I mean, definitely being a female, and then I mean, she was the only female really in our department. She hung in with the guys physically, mentally, verbally, the whole works. And so she was one of the ones that had an impact early on, and in my career. And then I ended up getting promoted, and we were lieutenants together. And then she became a battalion, and she eventually became my battalion chief a few years, and she was awesome as a battalion chief. I think she was better off as a battalion chief, or she was better as a battalion chief than as a company officer because she just got to be in that role a little bit differently. Um, but the one that really had a huge impact on my leadership and a lot of the stuff was Eric Andrews, who he was my battalion. He was Janet in my battalion early on. Brilliant, brilliant tactician, just a really, really smart guy. He was the one that I learned trusting your people, and he was willing to try anything. When I was in the training division, and I brought to him in 2000, must have been about 2004 or five, smoothbore nozzles, and there was really no smoothbore nozzles in our region. And I'm like, going to this low pressure nozzle is going to be it's going to be the cat's meow. And he's like, when I came in, we had smoothbore and we got these fancy combination nozzles, but he trusted his people, and he knew that that I wasn't just coming to him with just some half-ass idea. And he knew that I spent a lot of time and effort in this. And so if I was into it, he was into it, and he supported us. And so he tried anything. We tried calves engines. We tried, a bunch of stuff. So, and then he was my battalion, and then he was the ops chief. He was the training chief, and he came to me in 2000 and asked me because he knew that I had desire to be a training officer. And he's like, "Hey, the union didn't really care, but he came in and said, 'Do you want to be the next training officer? Because I'm going to go and do this special project. You can be a temporary training.'" And that was my first experience in 2000 of being a training officer. And he man, he took me to conferences. His volunteer department that he was also running, he would say, well, just get to the conference. um, I'll pay for the department will pay for your conference fee, but my volunteer department, I'll put you up with my volunteers. And so he took me to conferences back in the mid to late 90s, and that I would have never been able to go to. So he definitely had a huge impact. When he left our organization, we went backwards.
Yeah.
So, and he still is an influence in all of Snohomish County. He's still running a volunteer fire department or a part paid fire department now,
Oh, that's
the
great.
one that he's been with. And so he's been in the fire service. Well, he's in before me. So he's probably knocking on 45, or no, he's probably knocking on 50 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And
That was a long answer for,
no, there's no such thing for this. I promise you. But I love hearing, and I hope other people listen to that whole thing about conferences. I'll get you there. I'll find a place for you to sleep. We'll figure it out. Like I was very fortunate enough where I got very similar young in my career to be able to do stuff like that, and it was incredibly beneficial, right? To
yeah.
to see that stuff, especially something that most young kids can't afford.
Yeah,
Like
he definitely changed. I mean, he would break the rules to my benefit. And I mean, I got to go to FDIC in 99, 98. I can't remember exactly.
yeah,
And I got to go to FDIC, and then I got to go to FDIC East, which was in New Jersey, and I got to go to FDIC West. I went to FDIC three times in a year. And it's because he, being in the training division, had that control of the money and would allocate the funds and say, you're engaged. If I can get you to these conferences, it'd be great. I mean, and the other thing that's different nowadays is now there's a conference like every week. There's a
yeah,
conference, right?
yeah,
They're different, but back in the 90s, you'd be like, there wasn't very many conferences, and you didn't see the little organic conferences that are currently happening these days. And so there wasn't very many opportunities, and when one showed, he made sure that I could get there, which was awesome.
yeah, yeah. I have a probationary guy. I'm his mentor, and we were talking about FDIC, and he was like, "I want to do this. Like, this sounds great." He's total into the job. He's only a handful of years. Our department, he's only like 8 months or something like that, and lives at home, early 20s, no responsibilities, and he was like, "I think I'm just gonna pay for FDIC." I was like, "Really? That's amazing!" And the department was whatever about it, and he was like, "No, I'm gonna go." He didn't do the hot classes because that was tough, but he was like, "I'm just gonna go," and he was like, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." Like, it was the best thing. He got to experience so many things. He took classes down there, the workshops or whatever, not workshops, whatever they call them. But And for us, like where I live, it's a 4 hour drive. So like
Yeah.
you can always find someone to crash, like a floor to crash on. You can drive yourself. All you gotta do is just try to get in. And yeah, those conferences are I couldn't speak. And again, I love hearing that you had a similar experience like that. That's a big deal for sure.
Yeah, he definitely had a lot of confidence in me. And I mean, I wouldn't be, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have the opportunities I have. And there's a couple people that really helped out over the years. Ed Hatfield, who was Firetown's owner for many years. So I got to teach with Firetown, and that was all like um, California truck companies, vertical ventilation stuff. So, but if it wasn't for Chief Andrews, a lot of these opportunities and I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I wouldn't be in the Fools and be an Eat More member in the Fools. I wouldn't be, instructing for groups like Brothers in Battle and
Yeah.
CFT, and there wouldn't be any young officers on fire if it wasn't for Chief Andrews. So I'm very grateful for what he gave to me. I wanted to be able to do exactly what he did, and I hope I did to a handful of people. So
Did you? How much of the relationship was you seeking him out versus him seeking you out? Like really?
I think initially it was, I mean, I didn't understand mentoring back in those days, but I think he just saw that, he took advantage of a situation. He saw a kid that was like all into the job, and I really didn't care what people thought about, my love for the job. And so he's like, man, I'm going to keep on feeding this kid candy and, send him to classes. And it just happened to be that, I would come back. I wasn't going to conferences to drink and party. I was going to conferences to learn. And then I'd come back with stuff. And so I think he did that initially, but then as I was getting older and I was a company officer, and then I started to really appreciate his perspective on things. And outside of being, we jokingly say, Chief Andrews was a poor communicator. I don't know if he was a poor communicator. It felt like he was a poor communicator to us, or if he was just like, he just let you deal with it. But outside of that, then it was me reaching out to him and how do I do this? And, I've got this problem. I mean, I've talked to him about a ton of leadership things over the last decade, and even when he's left, I've had the opportunity to go to lunch with him and hash out some shit that was going on in the organization, and making my final decision of why I should retire. And I will say that his advice was not necessarily the way that I went, but he gave me advice and perspective that really shaped my decision, a tough decision to retire. But yeah, I think, like I said, the last 10 years I was seeking him.
Oh, that's great. That's cool. That your whole career you've had him. That's amazing.
I mean, you add to the list. I mean, I've been very fortunate through the networking to have other individuals that I get a call and talk to on a regular basis. Corley Moore, Scott Thompson, Frank
Yeah.
Viscuso, Kurt Isaacson, Cody Trestrail. I mean, I've got a ton of people that are really into the job that really have helped. And, so, hey, man, I just love to meet Frank Viscuso. I'm like, sure. Frank Lieb
Yeah.
as another one. It's like, sure. I mean, I'll give you his contact information.
Yeah.
Give him a call. I mean, he's not one of those types of individuals that doesn't want his contact information out. It's like, you got a great question for him, give him a call. So I've been very fortunate.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Uh, we already kind of talked about some of these naturally, some of the questions that I had written down. So, the one thing I wanted to pick at you here was with building construction. Well, not the one thing, but the next thing was building construction. So, I also wasn't anticipating us talking about command, and that was a really cool conversation. So, thanks for all of that. But so one of the biggest things I hear about building construction is that new construction is significantly more dangerous, and that's always uh, the thing that gets thrown around the most. And yeah, what are some of your thoughts on that phrase and talking about building construction?
The fire service is dangerous. I I mean, here's everybody has perspective on like the building and construction. And I think my issue is as a firefighter, as an organization, or as a profession, one of the things that we've sworn to do is save lives and protect property. And it's a risky endeavor to do. And I guess my point would be if I separate engineered construction, also known as lightweight construction, I don't like calling it lightweight because that kind of changed it, but engineered construction and conventional construction, turn of the century stuff is like they're two totally different things. They're two totally different animals and they have to be treated differently. But if there's a fire in a taxpayer, which I don't have any taxpayers, but if there's a fire in a taxpayer, you still got to rescue people and put the fire out. If there's a fire in an engineered designed building, guess what? Our duty is still to protect them and to save them. So it means that you function a little bit different in an engineered building than you would in conventional constructed buildings. So is it more dangerous? Sure. I mean, basically what it comes down to is there are so many more components and engineered construction requires, that having trusses and everything. If the components are not all working together, because it's a system, it's like a roof system and it has to be protected. If it's not protected, then could be dangerous. If you don't know you're going into it, for instance, and you apply conventional tactics and you're jumping into a engineered building, guess what? You can get your ass handed to you really quick. In fact, a number of firefighters over my career have died in buildings, and it's probably because they selected the wrong tactics or they didn't know the building construction. Now, are there times that we don't understand the construction? Yeah, and so having a good understanding of building construction and understanding the type of construction that's in your area is significant. So, I mean, my argument all along when we've talked about building construction is I still have a job to do, and mine is different than yours. And when I went to my very first recruit school in 1988, I think we were using IFSTA 1. It guess what building construction they taught us? Everything on Main Street, USA. All the taxpayers and unreinforced masonry and blah 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 blah. Conventionally wood frame construction, heavy timber. Well, guess what I didn't have? Any of that. I dealt with engineered construction. So when the fire service started changing and we started to make building construction a little bit better. I mean, Brannigan's book is awesome. And that was a really good start getting everything off. But then it's like, I fight fire in a different environment than you do. And therefore I have to be different than you do. So again, if you apply the wrong tactics, and the wrong building, then there's an elevated level of risk. So, I hope that kind of covers, like the risk aspect of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I got follow up question. So I think one of the challenges that I've seen is obtaining that knowledge, right? Other than just truly like experience of being on fires in different types of buildings. I know Brannigan's book, and you obviously can read through those, but you kind of said too, like, I don't really fight fires necessarily in taxpayers and mid rises like that, and some of those things. I know that there's what is it, Francis Ching or that book,
Oh,
right? Like
yeah,
with all the
that's a
printed
great book.
pictures, great book. But then it doesn't, it's about recognizing parts of construction, not necessarily
Yeah.
like, how that applies all the time to the fire service. And I personally like, I struggle to find resources for more building construction other than just people with practical on the job in my area, with knowledge of the buildings. And is there
Well,
what kind of
here's it. I got
resources you got? Yeah.
Yeah. So Brannigan's book is kind of like the basis that starts
Yes.
you all off, and I think it's usually one of the college books for everything. But this book right here, The Art
Okay.
of Reading Buildings, by Dodson
Yeah.
and Mittendorf, is a great book, and I think it's the next. It's not the end all be all of books for building construction, because the reality, I mean, one of my frustrations with firefighters in building construction is like they'll say things like trusses are killing firefighters, or I mean, they'll say all these things, and like they really don't know what they're talking about. Neither do I, really. I mean, and so you get firefighters like, well, I've built houses, or I'm a contract worker on the side. I'm like, well, just because you pour concrete doesn't mean that you know about the different types of timbers and different types of trusses. It means you pour concrete and you do a labor job. I mean, it's a tough job. So firefighters infuse themselves in a position, push themselves in a position where they're trying to be expert. Now, this is something that goes on in society today. This is killing our society, in that you don't know what really is true. You know, um, misinformation, especially given to firefighters, is creates fear and creates a misunderstanding of what it is. And so I look at it like, if you built houses, it means you know how to frame, and you probably know the different types of what a lintel is and all these other things, a header and all that. But you probably don't, other than if it's conventional construction techniques, but you probably don't know really much about the truss, or how the truss is designed, or why the truss works the way that it does. Just you know how to put it there. It'd be the equivalent of like me being an EMT. I'm not a doctor,
Yeah.
and doctors are the engineers. I mean, the engineers that design the trusses are the ones that are like, this is how it works. No, they're not designing trusses to kill firefighters, which is a statement that gets, these engineers are designing trusses to kill firefighters. Like, no, they're not. They're designing trusses to make beautiful buildings. And we just have to know what type of building we're in. And if you don't know it, and again, if you apply the wrong tactic to it, then you could get in trouble. And I think when we think of some of the big fires, over my history, where it deals with trusses. And I mean, one thing that I know Vinny Dunn, he was the one that said, "Fear the truss," and I get why he said it back in those days. And I think this is my opinion. I think the reason why that had occurred is the the type of construction was changing, and when you work in an environment that's mostly conventional and taxpayers and all that other good stuff, and like all of a sudden a new McDonald's comes in with trusses, they can't treat that McDonald's the way they did, the building that was built at the turn of the century. And when they did, and a firefighter got hurt or killed, then they're just like, whoa. So then it was, trusses are killing firefighters, fear the truss. Other misinformation, and not that Vinny said this, but other misinformation that ends up happening is like trusses. And I was taught as a young company officer, it's a domino effect. When one truss fails, then they all start falling. Well, that's not true. At least that hasn't been my experience in 30 years. I've gone to a lot of fires where the fire has burned through, and the trusses are still standing there. Like one truss failed, but not the ones next to it. And on the roof pervs, William Knight and James Johnson and Stephen Tyler and we've hashed this out, and I think where the whole domino effect comes back to the arch truss, bowstring, what some people call it, the arch truss. I should say a lot of people call it bowstring.
Yeah.
We call it the arch truss.
Yes.
Um, when when we're looking at those big buildings, the bowling alleys and the old grocery stores, and when we look at that arch, the distance between trusses is typically 16 feet, and then they had a board that was tied to it, and when you lose one truss, now you're talking 32-foot span just disappeared. And if that truss falls at an angle, or it's pulling on the end, it'll pull the other truss down. So our feeling is we think that that's, where that came from. But the reality, and like engineered TGIs and other trusses, like you just don't see them domino down. Again, it's a system together, and when the system is together, the membrane of the roof and everything it holds it together quite often. I mean, my entire time working a ladder truck, we were on top of roofs that had fire in the rough area of the attic area, or the void space. We just didn't stand in that area. We gave up some space, and we could tell where the fire was at, and we could see waffling on the roof decking, and we could see, like, I know if I were to sound that with my hook, it would be punch right through. Well, guess what? Don't fucking stand there.
Yeah.
Give yourself some space. And when that area would collapse, we would just kind of retreat back to a valley, and we'd sit, like, look at it and like, all right, well, what needs to be done? Did this open up and create the ventilation that was needed? Or are we on a defensive, we're going to do a defensive strip to separate the two parts of the house or whatever it is? And can we work in this area? And as long as we can work it, yeah, we'd continue working. So that probably wouldn't be happening in a lot of organizations that are on the East Coast because, they've had some significant incidents, wall bombs. I mean, it was just the anniversary of Hackensack, New Jersey,
Yeah.
just the other day. So, and that created a lot of fear. And I think when you don't understand things, then fear makes things really difficult. But what I tried to approach thing as is that if I didn't know, again, going back to the don't be judgmental, be curious. If I didn't know, then I need to start doing some research on things. And when you look at like just roof operations in general, um, not very well. I think it's been 11 or 12 years since a firefighter has died as a result of working on the roof. And those are pretty damn good odds, considering that we still have firefighters dying with a nozzle in their hand inside buildings. Um, we do have some floors giveaway. Um, um, Nate Flynn, that was a McMansion, but that fire had been burning underneath there for a long time, and they just didn't catch that the fire was below them on the 360, which is a key. If you don't know where the fire is at and you're working in an engineered building and you got smoke to the floor, I'm like, I would be really, really concerned. I wouldn't be going in there. And I can't second guess him because I'm not there. I don't know what he was seeing.
Yeah.
But when fire goes unchecked for a long period of time and you don't put any water in there, it's wood. I mean, a concrete building, a steel building will come down and that's on fire. So it can't burn forever. I mean, we'll use uh, uh, I can't remember. I think it's Hackensack. The fire burned in there for like 40, 41 minutes, 42 minutes, unchecked. The only thing that was being done was they were cutting vent holes, making the fire bigger, and they couldn't get water into the attic space. And when that happens, man, could you imagine if you didn't put any water on a house fire, a bedroom fire in a house for 50 minutes?
Yeah.
It would consume the entire house, right? And so now when fire is in the attic area, and in this case, like with Hackensack, that area had auto parts stored up in it. So now they had a heavy, you know, heavy fire load, or so, I mean, some of it's fire load, but a heavy load in the middle of the trusses, which shouldn't be there. And then they put lath and plaster underneath, which shouldn't have been there either. And so you add all that weight and put fire in there, and within 40 some minutes, it all going to come down because we didn't put water in there. So if you don't know where the fire is at and you can't get water to it, then get out of the way. I mean, I don't care if you're in conventional or if you're on an engineered. It's just like you can't be above something that's burning for a long period of time. Um, so it's got to be coordinated, and you need to know that water is getting to the fire before you put yourself in that position. I think that's been the biggest change over my time on the ladder truck. We were um, ultra aggressive and moving ahead of the hose probably more than we should have. When we understood, I mean, we were utilizing sounding techniques and watching the roof, and I don't think that we were in any significant dangers, but we probably could have slowed down a little bit. And as you know, FSRI is coming out with the data. I mean, I don't want to say that vertical ventilation is not effective. It is very effective, but I think its importance on the fire ground is taken back a notch because we're starting to find out that in commercial buildings it's a little bit different, but in residential, I mean, what we were saying when I was leaving the truck was a lot of the ventilation that we were doing wasn't so much on ventilation for the occupied space, because we had very aggressive engine companies and flowing a lot of water. It was more for the void space. So we were trying to catch the fire that's in the void space and cut it off from traveling. It was more like an overhaul from the top
Yeah.
down type position. But
Yeah, I mean
I,
It seems like at least in my area, ventilation, vertical ventilation, I think it got a bad rap because of exactly what you're talking about, like knowing where the fire's at and kind of having a grasp on that and coordinating that whole. I think the coordination thing was one of the biggest issues in my area where you'd go and you'd watch like LA or something like that where they've done it so much where they don't really have to communicate that much, where the engine company's going to be there and they're going to do their thing, so by the time you're ready to do your hole, you're pretty much ready to go, and all the
Yeah.
timing just works out. It's a well-oiled machine. But then you get into suburbs where that's not always the case, and
Yeah.
truck companies were cutting these vent holes before they would even know where the fire's at, and that
Yeah,
doesn't really do any.
before the hose line can even get to the position where they need to
Yeah,
be. To
obviously that. Well, I
put
shouldn't
fire
say
there.
obviously, but like getting
Well,
up and cutting a hole in a roof seems like it's a quicker operation, depending on where the fire's at. You know what I mean? So if you have a bunch of people that are amped up, they're probably going to beat. At least in my experience, from what I saw, they're going to beat that engine crew almost all the time. It seems like to get a
well,
hole cut.
it all comes down. I mean, here it really comes down to resources and training.
Yeah,
And so when you're like at LAFD, who they're probably the best when it comes to vertical ventilation. I mean, I would bet that they probably are vertically ventilating a roof every single day in the LAFD. One of the truck companies is. So their experience in dealing with bowstring or arch truss and all those roofs is really, really, they're the top. And they have a ton of resources. So they get on scene in a very quick period of time. They have a ton of resources. They can dedicate. I mean, on a residential house, they'll put two ladders on the roof, and it just all depends on the staffing of that task force. But if they did that, I mean, that's like 10 guys on the roof, 10 firefighters on the roof. What we did is we'd put one truck, and then if it was commercial, you might have two trucks. So you go from three to six. So we had to give up more space. Um, but but the point was is that if you don't have training, if you don't know how to function on an engineered roof, then guess what? You shouldn't be up there. You just don't. The chief doesn't come in and say, "Hey, I want my truck companies to be more aggressive, and I want roof ventilation going on." It's like, we'll bring in training of people that know how to do this, get them the right equipment, give them time to train and understand, get them to understand the building construction, what they can and cannot do. I mean, they got to know all those things before you actually do it. And I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble in the fire service. We had um, we applied conventional tactics on an engineered, and they didn't know how to read it, they didn't understand it, and they got into trouble. And then the other thing that just frustrates me is like, we kill firefighters every year on roofs. I'm like, we do not. And so that's misinformation again that causes people, and like, it doesn't really matter. I mean, in social media, I can post up
yeah,
Bill Carey's thing, and they just don't answer.
yeah.
The individual, I'm like, here, this is the data, and they just don't answer. And like, well, let's have a conversation. Why do you believe what you do? I'm showing you the data, and but I got off on a tangent there. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a great conversation. Especially, it's relevant in my area because a lot of departments don't do any vertical ventilation because of some of those feared beliefs. And yeah, I don't, like you said, like you can even show them the data sometimes, and it doesn't change minds or opinions. But
Yeah, but
yeah,
if you're going to do it, if you decide as an organization you're going to do it, and the ops chief and the train chief get together and like, yeah, we're going to have a truck company. Let's say that they decide to staff a truck company in your organization. Like, well, what do you want the truck company to do? You don't just put three or four new company officers on there and like, bam, do it. It's like, what is the goal? What is the mission of the truck company in our organization? Do we want to do vertical ventilation? If we do, what are the parameters that we're going to do vertical ventilation on? And then all the chiefs got to know, and all the other company officers need to know, and the truck company needs to train to that level. I mean, it could be like, well, I mean, one of the things that I liked about Blue Card is it is like on big buildings, the ladder truck always went to the roof. And one thing I will tell you from my experience, and just you look at all the fires, like when you put the ladder truck on the roof, even when there's fire venting from a portion of the roof, like, oh man, there's fire already coming through the roof. Well, before you say that, you got to look at what the size of the building is first. yes, I will give you if the building is 30 by 30 and fire is venting through, I was like, yeah, you probably don't need to be on the roof. But when it's, 500 by 500 and there's a small burn area, like a 5 by 5 burn area through the roof, like that's a lot of roof space. And so, but Blue Card would put a company on the roof to size up the roof. You will know the condition of the building, especially on a big box, by reading the roof. If there's partial collapse of the roof or sagging or weight starting to drop in, that not only will the roof not last very long, but the fire that we're fighting is just get everybody out, or let's keep the lines on the exterior to the doors and the roll up doors, and because half this roof is about ready to come in. That is probably the most critical part. So being able to read that and understand that is significant. um, so again, it comes down to training and resources. Don't do it half-ass. That's how we get people hurt.
Yeah, yeah. This statement kind of goes along. It's like the converse of new construction more dangerous. But one of the things I hear all the time is that like old construction, traditional construction, conventional construction lasts longer. That you have more time to operate within that structure versus a new construction or something like that. That's another common thing I hear.
And I would tend to agree that that is the case. That if we were to take a bowstring arch roof and you put a fire in that building, I think the building of same size and now using engineered um, an engineered truss product of some sort, I think generally speaking, the even though both are truss, but we're talking about an older building versus the newer engineered building. I would think that the older building there'd be more mass there, and that you can't argue against. Is that mass is always king when it comes to that. But engineered trusses, when they're protected with sheetrock or whatever is being used, they can last a decent amount of time. But when the sheetrock fails, or you do not have protection, so like garage venting over garages on residential is we basically didn't say you'll never, because never shouldn't be used, but it's like there is no tactical advantage to venting a garage. What what are you saving property wise? How many lives are in the garage? Not typically anybody. And they're usually garages are not protected. So the trusses are exposed to whatever fire. So that's a very dangerous position to be in. It's not worth it, right? Um, but generally speaking, mass is always king when it comes to those things. Now, a newer engineered construction is mass timber buildings, which is being built and has been adopted in the U.S. Um, and it's coming from Europe, and this is now the new thing that firefighters are getting in an uproar over. It's like an all wood frame building. Are you kidding me? Are they stupid? But it's CLT is a cross laminated timber, and they're thick, and they will last longer than concrete because they're again going back to mass, and that a 4-inch floor of wood, even though it is glued together, and the resins that they're using now are they for the most part they're stronger than the wood itself, and so they can handle the fire. It's the wood that's charring. But the issue is like that will absorb more BTUs and last longer than a concrete floor, because a concrete floor will eventually fail. It'll spall, and it'll have you know a drastic failure because concrete can't handle it. Just the same as when we're talking about metal frame buildings, high-rise buildings. That's why they spray in the protectant. When the protectant isn't on and you put heat to a steel girder or I-beam or whatever it is going to fail. The benefit that wood has is it absorbs the heat, and then it starts to off gas pyrolysis. And as it's off gassing, it's creating charring. Charring is actually protects the wood. It slows the ability to consume the wood. So, I mean, my feeling is on engineered buildings, I'd be on on a wood truss building any day compared to, a steel bar joist that's unprotected. You're like, no, we know it's steel bar joist. If we can, we'll pop some skylights, get out of there. But for the most part, maybe cold smoke type of thing. We'd cut a steel bar joist roof, which will have metal decking, which is a whole nother,
Yeah.
ventilation tactic and all
Yeah.
that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that when we're looking at engineered construction, um, like the mass timber, which is going to be, I mean, if you haven't looked at it on YouTube, it's called the Brock Commons building. It's a 18-story residential or 18-story student residential building. So it's on a college campus in British Columbia. And once they got done pouring the concrete for the stairwell and the elevators, they assembled the building 18 floors in 2 months. That doesn't mean that they finished everything up and it had to go, it has sprinkler systems and everything else in it, but they basically created an 18-story high rise, excluding the concrete pour in 2 months. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's um, I mean, I'm not a concrete expert. I can't talk on, the environmental side of things, but, the experts say that, if we can have it as a wood product, it's better for the environment than the concrete is or anything else. And I know the wood, like the CLT stuff, the data that I've read on that is it's as strong, if not stronger than concrete, especially when it's under fire. So that's the new thing.
Yeah, those the CLT, I that's been making its way around. I think with the same kind of that like lack of understanding's been creating fear around it with those either mid-rise or high-rise total wood frame buildings, and people have been calling those like fireman killers and that kind of stuff. And it's, I mean, a lot of them are sprinkled, but I guess when those fail, that's what people's fears kind of become. But yeah, that's a really interesting take with, or not take, but information about those laminated timbers because you would think, like most people would assume, when there's glue involved, like that they're going to fail so much quicker, and that they
Yeah,
can
I mean,
hold
one of
their
the,
own is
here are things that I learned young. I mean, not only the domino effect of trusses, which I didn't experience, and I mean, I'd love to see some video footage of a domino effect, but I've watched a lot of videos on roof operations over my career, and I haven't seen anything on it. But so there's that. Then the other thing and there's still a video out there on YouTube of some old guy teaching back in the 80s, and the gusset plates, when fire hits them, they explode off the truss, and you can hear them pinging on the ground. I'm like, bullshit. First of all, if you're inside a building that's raging fire, I was like, if you can hear gusset plates falling to the ground after, I mean, I highly doubt it. But can a gusset plate, fall off? Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but what I will say is that again, going back to the charring, we've looked at a lot of trusses that burnt trusses, and the gusset plates are all still there even through charring. It binds them a little bit more together. So um, again, going back to, I'm not saying that a truss is going to last longer than a conventional, 2x6 built rafter. That is not the case, but it's not as bad as what people make it sound at. And the other thing was the gasoline that holds these things together. And I mean, quotes like, I've seen it, the gasoline is burning, dripping off of the trusses. I'm like, what? I'm just not buying it, especially now. I mean, these are stories from things of the 70s. These guys were telling stories that, they come through the 70s and in the 80s. But now the resins that they're using for all of this stuff are PSLs and LVLs and laminated veneer lumber and all CLTs and everything. The resin that they're using is is super strong, and it resists heat better than it ever has. And I mean, I can't speak to it. I get all my stuff from James Johnson when we're talking about these
yeah,
things, and
yeah.
he sits on the Canada's board for building construction stuff, representative of firefighter, and he has the trades in the background. He's a journeyman, so he studied a lot of stuff. So he's the one that has a good amount of the information when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that the laminated timbers are like OSB pressed together
Yeah.
a whole bunch, and it's like that's not exactly the case of what that is. Like,
Yeah, it all depends. I mean, there's so
yeah,
many of them. There's like PSL, parallel strand lumber. When you see pictures, now the only ones that I really don't like is when they're fingered like this.
yeah,
I
okay,
think that could be a little bit more dangerous. But when we're looking at the ones that are LVLs, laminated veneer lumber, and PSLs and everything, it's like those are very expensive pieces of wood. So when somebody takes a picture and they're using it for like a portion of the building inside the house, the reason why the builder and the engineer are using it is because it's true dimension, meaning that it's perfect. There's no warping to it. There's no nothing. That's why they're using it there. And they're like, this piece of shit, this cheap stuff. I'm like, no, it's actually probably about 10 times more expensive than the 2x4 or whatever they're using. It's super expensive stuff. And the data on its thermal protection is like its charring pattern is equal to that of of an equivalent dimensional lumber. So it really isn't what it is. But firefighters doing what firefighters do, they don't know. They talk shit about it. And you're like, I mean, that's the big one we always get into. Like, and William Knight wrote a great response a couple years ago on that. And I know when it comes up, somebody usually like, oh shit, and they go and they pull that old response and they drop it into when somebody says that, and they're like, well, this explains it all in greater detail. But yeah, don't be judgmental, be curious rather than, before you say something, again, goes back to like the engineers and we got to trust the people that are putting together this stuff, that at least that they're giving us the right information and the limitations. I mean, everything has a limitation to it. So once you understand the limitation, you know what it is and you can identify it, the type of construction in your area, that you're good. So
yeah. I mean, they're not out there trying to kill us, like most people would have you believe, right? Like,
it's not like an active shooter situation.
yeah, and it's all information you can find in one way or another, right?
Here's another good example how information goes bad. Captain Dern from Fresno, he fell through the roof. Horrific, right? And Captain Dern did some things that, I'm sure if he could do it again, given the circumstances, he would handle it differently. One, he didn't sound. When you see him get on the roof, he's kind of got one hand on the shaft and he's kind of like gives it a pop. That's not really sounding. And he was transitioning from the protected side, which was the residential living portion of it. And there was so much smoke, he couldn't see the small little change, which was the garage. That's where the fire was. They were struggling to find the fire. They were in the house, they were going through. So delayed water on the fire, unprotected trusses that had been burning for, I don't remember what the time period is, but for a longer period of time than need be. And the captain goes across and he steps across and just disappears,
Uh,
right? And and everybody talked about how all the failure of the truss and this and like, well, when you look at the still photos, the trusses are still there. What
yeah,
failed was the decking. If he would have been sounding and if he would have known the transition was there, slowed down a little bit, then he would have been sounding out ahead of him and he'd have punched through him like, guess what? Don't go there.
yeah,
And then he would have figured out, oh, whoa, guess what? I found the fire and it's in the garage.
yeah,
It's a fire in the garage, not in the house. But thankfully he was wearing most of his PPE and his mask and everything. And sadly, he's not on the job, but he lived through it, and it was a lesson learned. And but what ends up happening is, this is why we don't go on roofs, and this is what ended up happening. And the trusses failed. And like, no, the truss didn't fail. If we would have been able to look at that roof from a different angle, you would have seen waffling. You would have noticed that the OSB was brittle. I mean, that's the benefit of engineered construction, is that the decking will give way before the truss does. And you can see waffling across the roof. You should be able to see it with the smoke, coming from the vents for the attic or for the void space. And you'll be able to sound. And once you see that waffling, you just hit it very softly. And it was like your hook goes in and like, that's not where we're going, but let's back up. Let's move back 10 feet and go from there.
this is a softball, but it was another thing that I remember hearing younger in my career about roofs, and it was that we don't sound roofs because it weakens the roof before you get on it. And
Yeah.
I remember being like, I know, laugh, right? And I was probably like a year or two into the job, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what? What are you talking about? And someone was adamant about that, and it spread through a couple, other people were like, well, yeah, we're not going to sound roofs anymore because you might break it before you get. It's like, what does that even mean? We're,
I mean, I would guess that that comes from training, right?
I
And that
guess,
we get on a roof, hey, don't sound the roof. I mean, when we're out training and we're climbing on roofs of buildings that are not on fire, we don't sound the roof.
yeah,
We go through the motions of it because if you did, it would, yeah, I mean, it potentially causes damage. I mean, you have membrane roofs, you could puncture through the membrane, but when it's on fire, it don't matter.
yeah,
You're not, causing, look at it this way. If you were sounding the roof and the roof is falling apart, guess what? You shouldn't be on the roof, or at least you shouldn't be in that area.
yeah,
Maybe you got on the roof in the wrong area because if it's falling apart and it's on fire, that's a bad thing. If it's falling apart and it's not on fire, well, that's probably a derelict building and you don't want to be on. I mean, it's that one video that when they're on the taxpayer and they're trying to cut a hole and the roof just kind of
yeah,
drops down on, right?
yeah,
Like that's partly because it could have mold. It's 150 years old, all of those things. Nobody wants those surprises. Um, oh God, you mentioned something. Sounding. Oh, another one is like with roof ladders. I was taught that we use a roof ladder to distribute our weight across the roof, and that was early on. And but the more I started learning from LA guys, they were like, no, it's about footing.
yeah,
If you can't be on the roof because it's mossy, it's icy, it's snowy, it's anything, it's too steep. So it's more about your footing than it is about displacement. Like, well, where the hell did displacement come from? When you go back to the old type of construction where there was an actual ridge board and the wall and the buildings were smaller, the houses were smaller, you would hang the hooks over the ridge board. That is a structural member that's tied right into I can't remember what the member is called that in that construction.
I know, yeah,
And the hooks and then over the wall, it would then distribute between the wall
yeah,
and the ridge board. Most of the houses today, the roof line is too long. The type of construction doesn't have a ridge board on it. And we're still telling firefighters it's to displace your weight. Like if you have to displace your weight on a roof, you're in the wrong area of the roof, or you shouldn't be on the roof. It's that simple.
yeah. Yeah. That's another great one that I've definitely heard where I like it, you think if you could like X-ray vision through the roof, like you're like we're not even over anything structural. We could be in the, you know what I mean, until you figure out where all the structural parts are. You could just be in between, two trusses or something like that. Like you have no idea. You're not spreading your weight out. Maybe over some sheathing, but that doesn't really matter at that point. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I that was another one. There's so many just interesting things, and I don't know what it is. It seems like roofs and roof construction have more just false information or misunderstood information than like almost anything else in the fire service. It feels like, and maybe it's just because like I'm going on my own rabbit hole here, and I'm sorry, but maybe it's because there's so much more data now, like on like rescues and interior attack and all that kind of stuff. Where UL FSRI, they've put all this stuff out. Rescue surveys got all this, so like there's all this quantifiable data, and it almost just seems like maybe that particular part of our jobs there's really not, there isn't like a database type thing other than like people getting hurt or line of duty deaths or that kind of information. But
Yeah. Well, FSRI is coming out with more stuff. I mean,
yeah,
they've already got a little bit of information on um, the effectiveness of vertical vent holes, and then they've got something out on PPV and PPA. And I mean that data for PPV and PPA is out that
yeah,
you could use it, and it's like a 700-page document. And I mean, it's been my experience talking to firefighters that use a fan for ventilation, which I'm not against fans, but there's just some certain criteria. And for the most part, FSRI or UL at the time um, covers all the criteria. And well, shit, I learned that in the mid '90s from LA guys. What is coming out in the the study, or what did come out in the study, and the benefits of fans and how you can use them. Now, my department does PPV, post fire control, I'd call it, but we didn't do PPA. We did kind of do a modified version of PPA where we would get the line going on the interior and then turn a fan on them. But then when you're looking at the studies, like that's not the best thing to do. And that's when you're probably better off going more of the PPA approach, which in PPA, you put the fan on first and you wait, and you're waiting, I want to say it was 60 to 90 seconds, depending on the size of the building. And that just does not flow with the way our organization went,
Yeah.
with a lot of organizations. Like, when we arrive, we're not going to sit outside for another 90 seconds while the fan is operating. It's like we're going to occupy the space where we would potentially find victims, and we're going to do that as quick as we possibly can. We have a nozzle, a fire eraser in our hand, and we're going to flow that line, and we're gonna move that line flowing, and we're going to basically just squeeze the fire right outside the building. So like fan stuff, I mean, it's funny just how everybody looks at fans, but read the study, and I think you will find out some of the downfalls of using fans, or at least some of the things that makes them inefficient. One of the things I'll admit, what we learned is like you wouldn't use fans with vertical ventilation. And nowadays, it's like, yeah, when we have fire control, meaning we have water on the fire and we know we're pretty much knocking it, I don't care what you're doing. You can put fans, open up all the windows and run all the fans you want and do vertical ventilation. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So that's a change of mindset that I had from the early days, and that as UL has been able to prove that's probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah, that and door control, both of those, that was always well, I shouldn't say always, but that was a big thing. Like, oh, need to make sure the door is completely closed all the time. And it's like, well, hold on. Once you know where the fire's at and you have control to a certain extent, like
Yeah.
that air is good. That's not necessarily a bad thing to have some clean air coming in and making the space better visibility, better,
Yeah, I think
more
we went a little too
occupiable.
far
Yeah,
on door control with like the front door, and then it's come back in line
yeah,
again. But yeah, I mean, I learned when I learned how to search, it'd be like if you search in a bedroom, leave the door open so you have an easy exit.
yeah,
Well, now at the academy where we're teaching, like as soon as you get in a room, shut that door,
yeah,
and then when that door is shut, and you know that it's shut, and open up the window and start clearing smoke out of that bedroom while you're searching it. It's going to be the best thing for you and the best thing for the victims.
yeah,
And then when you leave, shut the door. I mean, those are just small changes that UL has helped prove is
yeah,
a good way to approach how we fight fire and smoke and all that other good stuff. So I don't like the door control on the front door, but I mean I love door control on the other aspects of it, especially when we were as a ladder company, we were searching without a hose line
yeah,
and a pressurized water can. You're using the membrane of the building and the doors of the building for your protection.
yeah,
If you can get into a room that has a window and you can shut the door, well, that door can last 5 to 10 minutes with direct flame. Even on the hollow core doors can last 5 to 7 minutes. Direct flame impingement. If you work in an organization where you got trapped in the building, you called a mayday because you're trapped on floor 2 or 3, and you're at a window and they can't get you a ground ladder in 7 minutes, you get some bigger problems in your department.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed that's been kind of interesting is there, like, when I started, it was VES. Then they added the I, right, which was important. I'm not taking away. That's what we're talking about, right? And now we're kind of going back to just calling it VES again because the isolation is implied for almost any form of search now. If you're truly learning
Yeah.
and taking the information that's quantifiable and given. And so now it's funny, like that's become just so common where we took the I back out of VES again because it's assumed that you are going to isolate and do those things regardless of how you're searching.
Yeah, I mean, I'll our good brother from Brothers in Battle, Justin McWilliams, and the search culture
Yeah.
group. And I mean, they're basically trying to remove VES as the terminology and
Yeah.
just call it a window-based search. And I totally support it. I get it. VES was a style of tactic used in the urban departments, on how to occupy the building because of the type of building it was. And you're right, it was implied. And I think the reason why we put the I in there, I mean, in my area, we couldn't do VES. We could do targeted searches,
Yeah.
which was VES. You just couldn't use the term because the term made chiefs nervous.
Yeah.
It's like that's an FDNY tactic. Well, just because you change the name and it doesn't change what you're doing. But we were able to do it when we called it a targeted search. And so I think along those same lines with the I, it's like, well, we're forgetting an important part of it. It's VEIS. You're like, well, the I has always been there.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. VES does not work if you do not shut the door to the room on the other side. You cannot be in the flow path. It's just like entering the front door. Now we're not shutting the front door behind us to control the flow path, but if there was another door on the other side, or it was like a separation, I'm searching that one space. Yeah, we'd want that. I mean, think of if the back room was on fire and it had a door on it,
Yeah.
and you were entering the front living room. Would, if you could get to the door in a fairly quick fashion, would you not run down there, shut the door, so then you can get the line in place to attack the fire? It prevents the fire spread. It prevents smoke from getting in and do the search. Well, yeah, that's part of what we do. It's
Yeah.
no different,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah, you're right on. I mean, like, one of the first fires I went on in my current organization, my company officer, he went and bird dogged. So I'm at the front door and getting the line set up. He opens the door and he goes, "Hey, I'm gonna go inside real quick. I'm gonna figure out where it's at." It was like a 1,500 square foot house, small enough, one bedroom. You could see enough of it from the outside. He's like, "I'm gonna go in, figure out where it's at." Goes in, finds it in one of the bedrooms, shuts the door, comes back to me. I'm ready to rock. He goes, "All right, we're gonna go in, take a right, go right down the hall, open the door, put it out." Like, there was no conversation about isolating. There was no like, we're gonna do that. It was just like, it just makes sense. Like, if you truly grasp like what we're doing and what your actions in the building are doing, and so on and so on, right? It almost just becomes implied if you really understand those things. And not, we weren't going to necessarily talk fire behavior, but I feel like that part of it is not taught in like fire academies, right? Like, you're taught pyrolysis, you're taught the fire triangle, you're taught flow path. Everyone loves to use the word flow path, but there's no like conversation about truly like you can control that in that fashion just by shutting some doors or something like that. And like, that's not part of like day one conversation, and so it just seems so foreign to so many people that don't get outside of that bubble.
yeah, I mean, I was fortunate when I was teaching at the State Fire Academy here in Washington, or not here, but when I was in Washington. And I got to work with some really good truck guys, and they happened to be from the county that I was working in too. And we did a lot of pressurized water can attacks, and every recruit at the State Fire Academy had to learn how to handle fire with just pressurized water can. Had to learn how to search, to locate fire, apply a little bit of water, shut the door, prevent it from spreading. Everything that like Eric Wheaton's doing now with his canned confidence stuff.
Yeah.
Apply water to the door enough so that as long as you can protect that side of the door, it makes the door last longer, right? All of these things. So when they were recruits, I won't say before they put a nozzle in their hands and were putting fire out with 150 to 185 gallons a minute, but when they were recruits, we taught them the importance and what the benefit was of using what we called the membrane, or what we called what we can say is the construction features of the building and the doors to prevent fire spread. And it has applied to the Snohomish County Fire Academy. And so all of our recruits are pretty damn good with the pressurized water can. So they understand the limitations of it, and they also understand what control they have. And we search without a hose line, which is against what Blue Card, does. But our county searches without a hose line, and I would say 90 90% of the time, almost 95% of the time, the crew that's doing a search also has a pressurized water can with them.
Yeah.
So they have a little bit of backup to help them out. And they don't carry it everywhere they're going. They might stage it somewhere, but the idea is that they understand that part of the building construction, and they understand the movement of fire and how they can do that. And that's key because now they're starting off at a very young age, or a early time in their
Yeah.
career. So now they have that skill set. Now these are just basic skills that are taught at, especially in the urban departments like Chicago and FDNY and such, that they've been doing that for 100 years.
Yeah.
And so when you work on the ladder truck, you can do these things.
Yeah.
Again, it comes down to the training that you get. If you don't know, then you don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Did I stump you?
No, no, no. I'm all about it. I, like I told you before, this I get so much out of these too, and I love just being able to talk about anything like this because it's fascinating, right? Even, yeah. So I don't totally know about this question, but we're going to roll with it anyway. So it's what part of building construction poses the highest risks to firefighters, and how can they lessen that risk? And I know it's a very vague question, but
I think when you don't understand what part of building construction is the most risk, that's tough. Because I think all the building construction, if you don't have an understanding of it and you can't identify it, then that's a significant risk. Um, as an example, um, I'm trying to think of a good. So for apparatus positioning, as a battalion, well, first of all, as a company officer on the ladder truck, it would just drive me nuts when engine companies would position and they're like, "Hey, we're staying out of the collapse zone." I'm like, "For what?" You know, it's like this type of building does not collapse outward. And so this has been taught wrong to a lot of firefighters and company officers. So when you can't identify the type of construction, so tilt wall or concrete tilt up or whatever you want to call it, that is a very dangerous. That is when you want to be worried about collapse areas, where you want to be on the corners or be out 1.5 or at least 1.25 on concrete tilt. But you want to give yourself some space because that would be terrible. Now, in my area, we have buildings that were built in a modern kind of main street, and they were tilt wall, and they were poured in like almost like what would look like an ice cube tray. So it created a brick effect. They tilted it up and they painted it so it looks like brick. Looks like brick veneer, or it looks. I mean, it's not true unreinforced masonry um, brick because it doesn't have the right pattern or anything like that. But now we have officers and firefighters arriving and like, that's a brick veneer wall. I'm like, no, it's not. It's
yeah,
actually a concrete tilt up that looks like brick. Like, what? There are styrofoams that are out there they use for cornices
yeah,
and part of the construction that you wouldn't normally be on, but if you got in the wrong area, that would not be good. I think the biggest risk is just that firefighters are not, generally speaking, are not really good in understanding building construction. They're not good students of it, so that adds a risk. And when our fire ground or our battleground is, you got to understand the building of what you're fighting. If you don't understand it, then that's creating risk. And then how to avoid it is like start buying books or get departments to get you books like these and the Ching manual, and so you can identify like, oh man, that's a panelized roof. Those are purlins, or this is the strongest area of the building because of their attachment points. Those types of things. That's key. And then getting out, taking these books and understanding it, and walking through a building, be it that you guys grab coffees or drinks or whatever, and you walk through a building, but as a company and talking about it. And as a company officer or the more senior person, be humble and learn as well. And don't don't feel like you have to know everything. It's okay to learn from your firefighter, especially when you got skilled firefighters that might have been roofer or something that can give you some advice on things.
Yeah, well, and especially like just when we probably all learn about building construction in the fire service, there's another new thing that comes out. So it's endless, right?
Yeah.
It's endless knowledge to keep up with, for sure. It's always going to change. What are some like good? And we kind of just talked about it, and I kind of know the answer, but still, I don't know if maybe there's another creative thing because maybe I don't know the answer. But what are some good just building construction drills that you could do with your company, with that a younger generation that might not have. I know we kind of polarize younger generations of not like changing a tire and that kind of stuff, but there's some truth to that, I guess, to a certain extent. But like, what are some drills that a company can do to assist in building up building construction knowledge? And
Building knowledge.
yeah,
I mean, one of the things I would do is if there's buildings being built in your area, it's been my experience that, when the fire department comes on site and you go and you talk to the right person from the beginning, you don't just go and like, we're the fire department, but you go and talk to the foreman and say, hey, kid, we see you guys are building a unique type of roof or whatever. And um, you, you got like 5-10 minutes that you can kind of talk to us about it, or you help us learn or show us. And they're like, you guys need helmets. Like, oh, we'll go get our helmets. And then they'll walk you through the whole facility. And now you've got somebody that has an idea of how those things are built together. And while you might have started to like, can you describe how this panelized roof construction is being put into place? And next thing you know, hey, what is that? And they're like, oh, that's actually this. And, it needs to be this. And that is probably, that will be just incredible knowledge, a good drill to do. Um, and then the other thing is if you're going to be in a certain area of your district for a period of time, for a few years, it's like going out and testing your people. And like, one of the things like James Johnson talks about is when he's talking about building construction, he uses EMU, and it's era, material, and use. And like, you should be able to size up a building knowing like what neighborhood is this in. So now we know the neighborhood was built 10 years ago. What type of construction? It's going to be engineered construction. What do you think the roof is? Well, the roof's going to be trusses. Um, uh, you know, all of these buildings, because we did walkthroughs, all of these buildings, because it's newer construction, the HVAC is actually stored in above the hallway in the void space. It's like that's a bad place to be for an HVAC, right? So you can start talking about these things, and that now starts breaking down the buildings. And now your firefighters are being able to go like, these are the commercial buildings on our highway. And that's where it's going to be a little bit dicier, because that's where you're going to have old and new coming together. But generally speaking, when it's talking residential and the multifamilies, is like a certain area is going to be, or a certain complex is all going to be the same. And so you're like, this neighborhood was built 5 years ago. This neighborhood was built 10 years ago. Is there any differences between these ones? Well, these ones have daylight basements. These ones don't. Those types of things. And now, as firefighters are going into neighborhoods, and especially when they're going on EMS calls and they can confirm a lot of things, they're like, they know these buildings, they know the layouts of these buildings, and they can now better talk about the construction features of these buildings. Now, everything is thrown out when you get 25 years in and you're having to re-roof the thing and all that. That adds another element of risk, because now the building can be changed, or homeowners come in, and when the protection was underneath the TGIs for the floors, they pulled out some of the protection because they thought this will be kind of cool having it exposed, and we painted it, a really cool brown color or a black color, and it's my man cave. Well, that now just increased the risk to firefighters going on the main floor, because if there's a fire down in the daylight basement, that floor will give away, and probably about the time that they get in, right?
yeah.
Because again, it's a system of components that gives the protection. And when the system is torn apart because homeowners come in, it was signed off as being protected, but then once the homeowner moves in, they can do whatever they want, really.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's no control over that, right?
Yeah.
Uh, we had I guess a near miss, which people probably will not admit that it was a near miss, but we had a larger McMansion type building, and they had a basement fire that nobody was home. They were snowbirds, and it was left unchecked. And they went in, and it was cold smoke. Didn't recognize that it was, to the floor, right, where it was going to potentially, point towards a basement fire. And what ended up happening was the only thing that kept the fire from growing to a point where it would have weakened the structure was a random. It had to have been like just a PVC, like, I mean, it would be like a drain pipe or something from one of the bathrooms or something had broken. There happened to be enough water in it where it extinguished the fire most of the way, because that melted in a basement because it was unexposed, like it was exposed and unprotected. It was like, whoa, what a crazy series of events that had to have happened. I think it came in as like a fire alarm, a residential fire alarm, and they almost got bit by it because they didn't realize what it was, and it just happened to put itself out from some crazy circumstance. But like you talk about the system and some of those things having to work together, sometimes it's some random thing like that you couldn't even anticipate that actually ends up doing, you know, keeping something bad from happening from.
Well, just as an
Yeah.
example, concrete tilt up or tilt wall construction. It's part of what holds the roof on,
Yeah.
or holds everything together, is the roof and the walls all together. So when you lose, a slab of that, now you have significant failure of the roof. And so that, I mean, being able to recognize that, I mean, there's some benefits to having tilt construction, especially for the building itself, but some risks where the fire could be what could cause some problems.
Yeah.
And if you can't identify it, you don't understand it, then yeah, you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the lesson, I think, with almost everything in the fire service, right? Is recognize it, or you're going to get yourself into trouble. Whether it's construction, fire behavior. I mean, it just seems like that's got to be the thought process people got to have. So,
Well, I will say that towards the the last probably quarter of my career, one of the things we started doing more often was 360, slowing down enough that doing a 360 so you make sure you don't have fire underneath you. And that has been trouble for many firefighters. Got a lot of firefighters into trouble with engineered construction. I mean, it doesn't even have to be engineered construction, but
yeah.
not knowing that you have fire below you. The art of reading smoke and understanding when you have fire or when you have smoke to the floor. I mean, think the fire below, because that if it doesn't have a neutral plane or doesn't have air coming in, then the fire is below you. It's filling the whole space, right?
Yeah.
Well, those types of lessons, um, I didn't learn those until later on. So now 360s are a very important part of it. Um, Early days, I mean, we were a two-person engine company, and we basically would set the pump and stretch the line and go. And this is before two in and two out.
Yeah.
And we would never do a 360. We just go right through the front door, and it's a little bit riskier to do that. We never got in any trouble, but 360s now would identify that we have fire in the daylight basement, and that we need to reposition the line.
Yeah.
Just because there's smoke in the house doesn't mean that it's on that main floor. So, I mean, that's a significant change in our operations, and something that could prevent firefighters from being hurt and killed. Understanding that.
Yeah, that recognition's huge for sure. Well, that's, well, not it, but I got my closing questions here. So, I just say that the building construction talk was an absolute blast too, and I love being able to, that I got an opportunity to pick your brain at that. So, it's been a lot of fun.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoy the roof aspect of it because that's what I did a lot of. I was never a builder. I didn't frame or anything like that. And I just do a lot of reading and talk to those that are, understand all that stuff and have done a lot of work. And so that's got me my background. But I think William Knight he's a smart dude, and he studies it really well. And James Johnson, those are the two guys that I get a lot of the stuff from. So they're the ones you would want to talk to get even more out of
Well,
that.
hey, I mean,
Um,
I
I'm
want to
just
say
in the
no
right
to that.
place.
That's for sure. But but
I'm
either
just in
way,
the right place at the right time.
it's still fun. Uh, so I got couple closing questions just to roll through, and then that'll be it for us. So, what's the best training or class you've ever participated in as a student?
As a student, well, oh man, I've been in nozzle forward. I took nozzle forward one time. I was a company officer. That was early days for Aaron Fields. Um, it was a great class. I think, it's really hard to get all the years of being in classes. I mean, I think of like, what's the class that's given me the greatest skill set? And they're not always the best put together. Because I think like all the Brothers in Battle classes, and I attended them as students before I was teaching with them, um, but classes that give you a lot of knowledge that you can use, like realistic, and and then they have some realism to it. And that's one of the things that Brothers in Battle does phenomenal is that they create a lot of realism. But I want to say Aaron Field's nozzle forward class from an engine standpoint was awesome, and that was in the early days. I know it's even better now, and because those were skills that we could apply the next day.
Yeah.
The other class that I really enjoyed in my past was the art of read and smoke. Um, I probably took that class 4 or 5 times from Dave Dotson when he was still teaching it. Now Rob Backer and Phil Jose teach it. Those are the two guys. And so I've sat in Phil Jose's class once. I've not sat in Rob's, but that is an incredible class. I think all firefighters should be required to take and understand because that is a skill that you can get. And then, man, I took a truck academy back in 2016. It's no longer around, but it was called the Quad County Truck Academy. It was in Eagle, Idaho, so it was over by Boise, and it was a 11-day truck academy. We were there for 2 weeks. It was incredible, and it was very realistic. Again, it goes back to realism, very realistic, and we got to do a ton of really cool shit. And they were the first ones that we did vent over fire. So a training container prop, and they would use tar paper in it as well. So it was some heavy black smoke, and you'd be on top of this training can, and it had space between a an actual grate, so you couldn't fall into the fire. But they would put on a nasty ass fire. They throw in some tar paper in there to create even darker smoke, and then they built up the sidewalls above you, so the smoke would hang. And so as you're cutting the roof, your saw was choking out. That is real. That happens. We teach firefighters at the academy and all over the place how to cut holes. But the reality of it is when you go on a roof that's got some smoke on it, your saw is having a problem. And so they recreated it. So not only do we have fire venting through the roof, which you don't normally get to do that in training, you also have to deal with smoke conditions, and you have to deal with moving your saw in and out of smoke so you can get it going. That was incredible training. So we kind of still do it at Snohomish County truck, or I'm sorry, Snohomish County Fire Academy. They do vent over fire as part of their fire elements when they're doing their MCOs, and so they do get something very similar to just not at that same level. But those were some cool classes. So I gave you three as opposed to one.
No, that's great. That sounds awesome, actually. And you said that venting over fire from that class in Boise doesn't quite exist anymore, right?
It doesn't. I mean, it costs a lot of money for them. I couldn't even tell you. Steven Tyler, he's a Eagle firefighter, or actually he's a company officer now, and he could probably speak to how much they spent, but it was slings. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if we went through 10 slings of OSB.
Wow.
That's a lot of wood. And they had, I mean, I wish I could pull up the pictures and some of the video to show you, but they created big box store with panelized roof and then a strip mall that was attached to it with a firewall. And then these are smaller kind of modeled versions of it. They had HVAC systems with PVC pipe strapped to the roof. So that was, the all of the gas lines that were on the roof. You'd cut a hole and start doing the offensive operation in the big box store. There's fire spreading. They had smoke machines underneath, fire spreading in a strip mall. You'd, find out there's fire here, get a company on that one. They're starting defensive strip, get a company on the next exposure. I mean, it was incredible,
Yeah.
incredible. It was some of the best ventilation training, and it was mostly that class was it was done from instructors from the Riverside, California Truck Academy, and now I think a lot of those guys. I don't even know if Riverside still has their truck academy, if it's just in house, but Rio Hondo is the academy now that everybody goes to, and there's a couple here in Washington State um, that they do that are not as realistic, but now my county is doing their own because our ladder trucks are trying to get all on the same page, and so.
Yeah.
But yeah, Quad County was the shit.
That
It was
sounds
awesome.
awesome. Yeah. Those creative things like that, man, to just make props that much better. I
Yeah.
I eat that
And
up.
that goes back to like if you're gonna do roof operations, and it made our ladder companies. We sent two shifts, so we sent ten firefighters, two shifts there that were working on the ladder truck, and it put us all on the same page, better than we were before.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do this type of operation, if the department decides that that's the type of training you want them to go to, wherever it is, so that they can get the most realistic, the best instructors that are doing this. So guys that are coming out of California or guys that are coming out of Washington, where that's the West Coast style of ventilation, much different than, an East Coast style. You can use circ saws on engineered construction. It's just you wouldn't normally do that. It's more mobile and easier to do with chainsaws, um, versus the East Coast style of things when you're dealing with conventional construction on a flat roof, taxpayer style. I mean, it's cut differently. You could do it with chainsaws. California does it on their type of stuff, but it's just a lot easier on with circ saws.
Yeah.
But
We
get realistic training.
we actually had. I don't remember. I don't know if you remember. We actually had that conversation because my department. I reached out to you. I think last year or maybe the year before. We were talking about my department does all rotary saw for everything, and we were maybe considering transitioning away from that. Somebody was looking into a battery still saw, and there were a whole bunch of things. I don't remember. I don't know if you remember. We kind of had a little conversation
Yeah,
about
I do remember that now
trying
that
to
you bring
figure
it
that
up.
out. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
the battery technology is improving. Brothers in Battle, we use battery circ saws for a number of our training stuff, and they're great.
yeah.
And the ladder company that I used to work on, they have them on the ladder company now. It's just an additional. I mean, I don't even know how many saws they have on the ladder company now at my department.
Yeah.
Um, but um, but yeah, battery saws are coming now. A battery chainsaw is just not there yet.
Yeah.
It doesn't have enough power, but I'm sure they're going to figure it out and do it. But if you're going to buy saws, chainsaws for roof operations, you got to buy the right ones. And Still is the best. They have the most power and the most reliable, and they make a saw specific for roof operations. Just get rid of that.
Yeah. The
That
guard
training
thing.
wheel, the
Yeah.
guard. You don't need that guard on there.
Yeah.
Some chiefs will say you do need it because we don't want you cutting too deep, but just train them on how to utilize the saw. So
Yeah.
that's just my spin.
I'm hoping. I'm hoping this year it gets in the budget. We'll see what happens.
We'll reach out if you need a little bit more. I'll get you guys that know what they're talking about because things have changed since I've worked on the ladder
Oh
truck.
yeah, okay, that's fair. No, we'll actually I think I'm getting into that season where I gotta. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent. Where we got to do budget stuff, and I think I'm there. But what's one mistake that you have made and learned from over the course of your career?
Yeah, probably the biggest mistake, and I've talked about it a lot on Young Officers on Fire and in a lot of my stuff, but in my leadership classes is the importance of developing relationships. And I had immature company officer, had been critical of a new chief coming in. I mean, it's a long story, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but basically being critical of this new chief that was taking over, And I had tested well as battalion all the times, and when it came down to it, um, I was number one on the BC list, and there was a BC position, and he passed me up, and he took number two on the list, and oh man, that killed me. It blew me up and made for a really tough time for me for a few months. But when I got a chance to talk to him, it really came down to that I did not know that I had fostered a poor relationship. But when you look at it later, oh yeah, it was plain as day. You can't talk shit about people like that and expect that you're going to be trusted. And when you want to promote up, I mean, one of the elements of being promoted is having trust, and that whoever is above you has to trust that you can do not only do the job from competence side of things, but that they can trust you. And it's a two-way street. I mean, the trust has to be there to be able to, that you can come forward with some feedback, and they'll listen to your feedback. Well, definitely that chief would listen to the feedback, um, but yeah, I had ruined that. So relationships, developing relationships. The more relationships you have, and if you foster and you actually nurture those relationships, it'll pay you big dividends. You'll be remembered when an opportunity presents itself, and authentic. Don't be a pretend type, but you take care of people, people will take care of you.
Oh, that's great advice. Yeah. Have you ever lost your passion for the fire service? If you did, what'd you do to get it back, and then what keeps you passionate about it?
Yeah, I haven't lost. I don't think I ever lost any passion for the fire service. It's been full throttle until June. I mean, my last day was March 8th, and then I left my last shift was like that following weekend. I was teaching in Idaho with Brothers in Battle, and it just went on. So I mean, I still get to teach a lot and pass on information. And now I look at it as we have so many great instructors in all of the cadres that I'm on, that I just kind of take the back seat and be kind of the color commentator and give some experience. But these younger firefighters, God, they got the great skill set. And you know I don't want to say nobody wants to hear from the old guy that worked on the ladder truck 10 years ago, but I think there's more relevance and better education when you got firefighters teaching, like, yeah, I just did this last week on a fire. I
Sure.
mean,
Yeah.
but losing my passion, the only thing I can say now is being retired. It's different. Um, so I don't think that I've lost it. Don't want to say trying to locate it, but I'm trying to understand it. Being retired is a bit challenging for me. Um, I love the job. I enjoyed it. And if circumstances were a little bit different, I still would be on the job today. But so, no, I haven't lost it.
That's fantastic. I mean, and also you're still involved with other things. Obviously post retirement, so you got to
Yeah, I'm
know your
still
way in. Yeah.
still doing the Fools and still
Yeah.
doing CFT. And we got a gig at the Mile High Conference in Colorado, the Highwaymen, which is a group of us that have taught vertical ventilation. So we have LA City Firemen, my driver, and I will be teaching together.
That's cool.
William Knight, a bunch of guys from all around, Arthur Ashley from Lexington, Kentucky. And so we all, just get together, and what we call it is the jam session. We get together and do a conference or two a year and just enjoy each other's company and teach. So yeah, I'm connected and having a great time.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's awesome. If you wanted to give someone a sense of how fire service culture should work by meeting one person, who would it be?
Um, I'm going to give you two people just because I'm going to keep it kind of local to my area for those that are listening, and then on the larger scale of things. So, two people that I think have done a really good job of embracing culture and understand the importance of it, and how it fosters a really healthy organization and how you can use it for the brother and sisterhood and all that kind of stuff. One of them is my driver, my former driver. Chad Berg was, man, he lives and breathes the culture. And he was one of the first ones that would take care of the new firefighters coming in. I mean, he invites them over to his house. I mean, he's not on the ladder truck anymore. He's driving an engine in the North Battalion, a busy engine, and so he gets to see a lot of probies, and the probies all love him because he brings them in. He gives them a good culture and teaches them this is what it's like to be a part of a really good company, and this is how I take care of your people. So one of them is Chad Berg, and he's just really good at that. The other one I would say is Frank Lieb. From he just recently
Yeah.
retired from the FDNY, and Frank Lieb does such a great job. He's a great host. Now I haven't gone to Medal Day with him. I know Corley and Kurt Isaacson and a bunch of people have, but he invites you in. He takes good care of you. He knows how to wine and dine you. When you know, and here is the assistant chief of safety. I mean, he's in the top 12 or 13 of the senior staff of the FDNY, and and he and his driver Joe, would pick people up and take them all over the place, and just really show them what really the FDNY is all about. And then outside of the fire department, he's that he gives of himself constantly. Um, um, he it doesn't matter what level you're at. He talks to firefighters, he talks to the small firefighters from small departments. I mean, he's just a really good um, um, uh, ambassador of the FDNY and of the American Fire Service. And then he's just part of a lot of really good stuff. And we just had him lecturing at our conference, Young Officers Conference in May, and we were doing a fundraiser for a firefighter that was oh man. I think Ryan. Oh man, how old was Ryan? Well, he didn't wake up one morning at shift, and he was in his 30s, maybe 40 years old. I can't remember his exact age, but his wife came and talked, and Chief Lieb came up to me and was like, "I want to talk to her," and he took care of her, talked to her, talked about he's going to help her get her message out, this whole thing, and then he called me the other day and he said, "One, I turned in my gear. I'm retiring. It's not nobody knows about it yet. It's not public yet." And he goes, "I want to give you some information. Tell Raquel that Ryan will be on the wall this next year, and they need to finish up their paperwork. They didn't have it all done, but he pulled the strings and everything to make sure that that got done, and did a personal like, hey, will you let her know? Nobody else knows right now, not even her fire chief. So you guys please call her and let her know that he's going on the wall or going in the memorial." And I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
that is that is just. I wish we had more chiefs like Chief Lieb. So
Yeah.
there you go, two guys, Chad Berg, Frank Lieb.
Uh, last one. What's the best part of the job?
Oh man, the best part of the job is the people. I I would tie. I'm like, the people are great. The thing that I miss is the people that I worked with. I truly loved helping people. So when I was on the company and we go on and calls them, and there were definitely times that I was just like, man, I can't believe we're here. But I loved meeting people in the community and talking to them. But for the most part, the things that I miss is the dinners, spending time with people, with the firefighters. I miss training with them, and and having a debrief and sitting on the tailboard of the apparatus and talking about it. And next thing you know, I was like, oh shit, it's been an hour. Dinner's We got to go get rest of the food, and I miss the meals, and I really miss the meals. So um, it's the people, and to tie it into with like the mentoring is when you got great people working for you, and got a good mentoring program, which our department does, and so you're getting to hang with new firefighters, and they're really good, well educated. They've got great training, and generally speaking, I think the firefighters that we hire in my former department, they're engaged, they're into the job, and it's great to see that. So spending the time with them and watching them grow, it's almost like raising kids, and it's super rewarding. They may not be the best baseball player, but damn, that's your kid that's out there, and Yeah, he hit the ball and ran to third base, but you know what? That's my son, and I'm super proud. So that's one of the things that I
That's
really
awesome.
miss. So,
I got one more little bonus thing that I just actually kind of wanted to ask. It's almost like a weird fan thing. So when you did retire, and I saw on social media that a whole bunch of guys came down from like all over the country. It seems like, what was that like? You know, that like did they surprise you? And then what was it like having, all a ton of your friends from all over the country just be there for your last day? I think that was just incredible to see that happen
yeah.
logistically, like all those people to come down and
Um, it was emotional.
yeah,
I knew some were coming. Kurt, Chief Ike, I knew he was going to be there because he was teaching that few days before my flag ceremony, which we kind of lined it up so that was going to happen. So I knew he was going to be there. I didn't know Corley was coming until I think it was the night before. It just logistically it became really difficult to keep it a secret. Mike Galliano, he came out to the night we were doing a dinner at the firehouse, and it was, I don't know, it was like 30 or 40 people having dinner at the station. And Mike Galliano showed up, and that was a surprise. I didn't know he would come up, but that was on his own. And that was really cool because he doesn't live close to our area, and so he had to cover some ground to get there. Um, yeah, I mean, it was emotional because as some of the people that I didn't know were coming, it'd be like, whoa. I mean, uh, I had guys that I started the resident program with, and now they're chiefs in other departments come, and I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't believe he's there. Steve Riggs, and I mean, all of it was incredible, and I mean, it was super emotional because then the end, it was like everybody's going out to where the flag ceremony is going to be and where the pipes and drums are going to come through, and it was just me in the bay, and I ran into Chief Jaeger, and she's been retired for I don't know 8, 10 years now, 8, 10 years, and she comes over and says, "Hey, kiddo, I thought you were never going to leave this place," and I just kind of broke down. I'm like, man, and it was a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was just blown away. So many people cared and came, and it was just incredible. So
yeah. It just it was one of those. I don't know. Fan is such a weird word, but like just as like a like I I've gotten to meet people in this fashion like you who I probably would have never guessed that I would truly get to have a conversation like this with. And what's ironic is Corley's ears must have been burning because he just said something in the chat. He said what's up, or at least I assume it's him because it was Firehouse Vigilance. But
oh yeah,
um, like that was such a realization that like the fire service is will always be the fire service was just seeing that like the connections of all these people, to show up and then blend with your crew who you worked with,
yeah.
like to see all that blend together was just so um I wish I could think of the right word to say for it, but it was cool's not enough, but like
Awesome.
it
That's my word.
really,
It was
right, like
awesome. Yeah.
just to witness like that's the fire service to me, like that's being a firefighter, and to see that on such a like you a lot of you guys that teach and you're part of all that together, like you're these icons, the what John Norman says, the shoulders of giants and that kind of stuff.
Uh,
Like truly, I'm sure it's probably odd to hear somebody say that kind of in a way, but like just to see like all these people getting together and just doing what firemen should do was so cool to me that
yeah.
I was blown away at that. I was like, damn, these guys all flew to friggin' Washington. Like that's so awesome.
Well, I would say, I mean, first of all, thanks for the nice, kind words, and I don't consider myself an icon. I mean, I had my icons, but and a lot of my icons are still alive today, and so I'm very fortunate. Like I was teaching up at the High Plains Conference in Wyoming, and Garrett Crotty. I'm like, man, will you take me fly fishing? I mean, this is like the mecca for all fly fishing. He's like, yeah, I'll take you out fly fishing. He goes, do you care if I bring somebody? I'm like, no, I don't care. And, so it's a secret. I'm like, it's a secret. And then, when I get there, he's like, for the conference, he's like, hey, you don't mind if Kevin Shea comes out and fly fishing? I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Of course I don't mind. Kevin
Come on,
Shea?
get on.
But like he's one of my icons. And
Yeah,
and what'll end up happening is, your time on the job, and icons are people that really care. So going back to the point of, what lesson I learned is like, take care of people and develop relationships, authentic relationships. That means you have to care about them. And we had Mike Dozier, who taught it, lectured at our conference, and he uses the word love. Love your people, and it's okay. I mean, not just because I'm the guy from Seattle area. Truly love your people, and that means you care about them. And when you show love and you take care of your people, be it that it's Kurt Isaacson or Chief Isaacson or whoever it is, Corley Moore, vice versa. I mean, it's like when you care about people and you really help them out, and you're just not kind of there to like, man, I'm just kind of fanning you and just
yeah,
want to say I've got you as a friend.
yeah.
Like when you do that, then that's what ends up happening in return. You've made an impact on them, and they want to show the impact that you've had, and they do strange things like come to your flag ceremony. I mean, Corley had to switch his lectures around. I think he was in Minnesota. I don't remember exactly
Well, he
where he
could
was
probably
at.
say it because he's still watching, so it
Yeah,
probably
well,
will.
he
But
could tell you, but
yeah,
he had to switch his lecture around to make himself available so he could be there. And he flew in and flew out,
yeah,
basically, is what he did so that he could still do the conference. I mean, that's awesome. And that didn't happen because Corley and I were Facebook friends. That happened because we were beyond Facebook friends, and we helped each other out, and that's what relationships do. So, and as for the icons thing, like, you do these things, you yourself will be an icon. There will be younger firefighters, and I don't know what the fire service is going to look like in 20, 25 years, but there'll be younger firefighters like, my God, these incredible icons. They'll probably have some different name for it, but these are the people that shape the fire service. And yeah, now the ball's in your court. I'm
it's
done shaping.
it's just awesome to see the authenticity. You know what I mean? That's what it really is, right? And like that really shows that we're not, even though like as social media has become what it's become and these connections have been a thing, like the fire service, like it's not just face value. There's obviously there's sections of it, and I'm not gonna like pretend that we're all sunshine and rainbows, but like, for me again as a fireman, like I'm a fireman in suburbs, like, America's fire service in a way, right? And um goes to FDIC, like takes the class. I'm just one of the people in the crowd, and again, to see like people whose classes I've sat in, or I've listened to podcasts or read books, and to see like again the authenticity behind some of these people is just it's so reassuring, right? That like it's real. The fire service is real, and people that would tell you it's not are full of shit. They're just not in the
Yeah,
right
I mean,
places.
so some of my icon, Dave McGrail.
Yeah,
When I first met him, like, man, what a down the earth kind of guy, and he cares about people and he cares about relationships. These individuals, John Norman, Kevin Shea,
Gustin. My dad was a
um,
big Gustin guy. Same
Gust.
thing.
I mean, Gustin's another. Yeah, Gustin's another one.
Yeah,
These individuals are so into people. They wouldn't be doing what they're doing, and they wouldn't be at the level that they're at if it wasn't for that.
yeah,
Because if you're a dick, and if you don't really care about people, guess what? People aren't going to listen to you,
yeah.
And I mean, I definitely would say that there are guys that are accomplished and they're difficult, and you use them, you get the information for what you need, but they're not the guy that you want showing up to your flag ceremony. They're
Yeah.
not the guy that you really care if they come, to the party. And that's just the way that it is. But it's those top dogs. Um, I mean, relationships. That's all. I mean, that's all I can say is just it's all because of relationships. And I was very fortunate, and I haven't watched too much of the videos from it just because I know that it'd be difficult to watch,
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
but the memories and some of the pictures I've seen, and it's like, wow, it was a blast.
yeah. No, that's really cool. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's it. I mean, damn. We talked about rabbit holes. We did 3 hours, man. Like that's.
Yeah, I told you we're going to do two plus hours. So
I told I was all in for it. So, well, here, hang out in the green room for like maybe 10 minutes after, because I know you want to get in your pool. I'll wrap this up, and then we'll go from there. Thank you again for anyone listening, and if they wanted to get a hold of you, how could they do that?
phone number is 425-870-0129. You can text me. If you call me, I can't guarantee you I'm always pick it up, but when you text, I usually get to those sooner. I'm sorry, my email is robfisher72@gmail.com. On the socials, I'm usually robfisher72. Um, Mostly on Facebook, but I've been struggling at being very active on Facebook lately. But if you reach out to me in Messenger, that helps. And then yeah, Young Officers on Fire, you can catch me there. And CFT, Brothers in Battle, Highwaymen, Roof Pervs. Roof Pervs is kind of on the back burner right now, trying to get everybody back together and do some things. There's James Johnson's going to be teaching building construction workshop at Firemanship, and he's doing it with one of the other guys that's come new to the Roof Pervs. And um, I can't remember it. Barry is his first name. I can't remember his last name, but he was a retired captain, I believe, out of San Jose. So very knowledgeable in building construction and did a lot of really cool shit on roofs and stuff. So, but we're trying to get all that band back together.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Where are you going to be with firemanship? You personally?
During the lectures, I don't know what I'll be doing. I'll be doing some supportive role and helping out. But teaching wise, I am teaching Irons Ready class, Garrett Crotty, myself. Can't remember who all's in it, but we're teaching the forcible entry stuff. And then I'm going to stay in Chicago for a couple more days after that. Wife and I are going to catch two Chicago Cubs games.
Nice. Hopefully they
And
win. 'Cause-
they're playing against the Diamondbacks. So it's going to be a challenge.
yeah, they haven't been super great lately. So, but either way, all right. Well, that's it for Rob, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. So thanks for listening.